Hello, everyone. Just sorting the pile of books. It kind of collapsed at exactly 6 o'clock as I was about to go live. So that was the problem, basically. Right, let's see if we can't move this a bit in. Yes, that's better. And swing this back around. Because it makes more sense for it to be back around than it does for it to be over there. And hopefully going to find the working link and send it to my girlfriend. Because I'm supposed to. And my mum. Because I'm also supposed to. It's always fun. Woohoo. Goes there. So how's everyone doing today? Sorry about this quickly. Just as the books collapsed, I forgot I didn't do the admin and, well, I rather like breathing. So, yeah, I'm going to quickly do the admin. Right then. So, hello everyone. Let's go to live chat so I don't miss anything. And we've got, hi, John Shea. Hello, Doctor. How's everything going? Well, books collapsing on me, but other than that, okay. Cameras now up all around the house. It's a rather fun thing. So, yeah, dealing with the joys of that. But yeah, getting there. Getting things sorted. Hopefully that's going to deter people. Hello, Carl van Gasberg. Hello, Albert Zaski. Hi, Martin Doc. Hi, Keeler19. Good morning to you. Hi, Daniel Freeman. Hi, Jay Rushin. Hi, Dunrick Ironhammer. Cool name. Hi, Jay Richardson. Ahoy to you. Hi, Gordon Collins. Hi, Calvin Gasberg. I think I said that already, but yeah. We are there. William Bolton, the tension builds. Well, it's more likely the Iron Brew builds, but will it go with tension? Yes, tension sounds better than Iron Brew building. Because if Iron Brew starts building, why would it need humans? Terrible. Daniel, I'm just going to laugh at that joke. Stafford Thompson, hello. Jeliff, hello. Adam Chow, hi. Evening, Richard Hughes. Hello, Jeff Beeler. Fortress Clark. I'm not sure about Fortress, but we have now got a rather large number of cameras around us. Hello, Sean Mack. Right then. So, we have two missions today. One, stop me drinking all the Iron Brew in about 5 seconds, because that could quite well happen. It's been one of those days. And two, to get through this lovely pile of 12 books. And also to explain the title. Fiction or Fraction and Fraction. Now, I often use that sort of title when I'm explaining to students the trouble with dealing with autobiographical accounts and some of the modern histories that are more televisually orientated. For example, there is one sitting behind me on the bookshelf, which I was sent to review, and I reviewed as positively as I could because I prefer to be a positive reviewer rather than a negative one. And I found many good points in it and many interesting things in it. But, yeah. Fictional and fraction. So sometimes things are fractionally the truth, or they're just a part of the truth. They don't include the whole context. Or they are bits of fiction. We're going to start off with one of the... Well, we're just going to work our way down this list. As you can see, there are lots of books here which are written by Stephen E. Ambrose. There are literally 2 in order. But there are some which aren't. And there are some which contrast with the title. Reduce. It's definitely a bunker in there. Between you and me, these 8... you, me, Richard, and... you, Richard, and me, and these 8 walls... Yeah, it needs to be a bit of a bunker sometimes. I do admit that sometimes I might not be the easiest person in the world to live with. Mainly from the point of view that I am very, very wrapped. I get very wrapped up in my work, and that means that sometimes I might not notice everything that's going on around me, which is a good point and a bad point. But we'll leave that to one side. It happens to most workaholics, I presume. Jerison, With the Old Breed is an autobiography. R.Y. Bergen was E.B.Sledge's corporal, and his book confirmed a lot of the mad stuff in that book. That's hard to believe. I know. I know. That's why I have it there. But you see, the thing is, that's why this topic is important for students, and this is why I get them to look at it. It's whether it's fact, fiction, or fraction. And sometimes the reason there is a bit of a difference isn't because of what's actually in the book, it's a perception of the book. It's like, I've also got Beyond Band of Brothers, the book by Major Dick Winters, here as well to go through. So it's an interesting collection. I like Paul Hagen's books, including this one, The Battle of Otranto Straits. Controlling the Gateway to the Adriatic in World War One, hardcover, illustrated June 15th, 2004 by Paul G. Haven. Cool. Good afternoon, Blue Shirt Builder. Now, again, you'll notice there aren't many naval books here. There is actually a naval book at the bottom, but there aren't many naval books here. There is one, and there isn't this one. They're the pure naval books. The rest are amphibious or land warfare. And there's again a reason for this. Quite simply, if I want to do this thing in a polite way, it's better to stick in areas which aren't my particular passion areas of history. That's my idea anyway. So, without much further ado, and later in than I thought I would do, I've got some war stories by Jeremy Bowen. And this is a good one. This is a very, very interesting book because lots of pictures, if you're interested in those, but Jeremy Bowen is a journalist who goes to Afghanistan, Chechnya, First Gulf War, Balkans, Israel, all sorts of things. And he reports us to wars. He goes through his war histories and the various wars he takes part in. And it's kind of interesting, a different count to have. On the day guerrillas took over a hotel in the rich part of San Salvador, trapping some American soldiers inside, we hung around outside as government soldiers occasionally blazed away with their heavy machine guns, enjoying seeing the guerrillas trash the official version of the war that the Salvadorian government was winning with the help of the American military advice. Now the Americans were barricaded into their hotel rooms and the rebels were in the middle of the city. A burst of gunfire sent a group of us leaping into a ditch for cover. We discovered as we flew through the air that some soldiers had been using it as a latrine. It was full of shit. We jumped out again, hooting with laughter, drunk on the noise of the battle. The BBC was trying not to spend money in the Americas at the end of 1989 because it was spending so much in Central and Eastern Europe. Which is why in El Salvador, we were borrowing cameramen from Viz News. a friendly news agency which produced pictures for TV networks around the world. In return, not being able to contribute very much, I followed Guillermo, his colleague Maite Caleno, a cool Salvadorian woman, and a painfully handsome Frenchman called Jean-Jacques around the city. Jean-Jacques' Argentine girlfriend, Marina, was one of the sexiest women in the Americas and also producer for Viz News. One day, after a lot of gunfire, some local cameramen plunged into a field where the grass was more than a head high to find who was responsible for it. That day, I was with Jean-Jacques. We looked at each other, thinking the same thing. Shall we follow them? Bullets had already been whizzing round quite a lot that day, and even though I was full of my freshman excitement, I didn't fancy it, and neither did he. When we went back to his office with what we both thought were good material, his boss tore into him. Jean-Jacques, this is crap. We need stronger than this. You're doing this kind of work, you just have to get stuck in. Actually, the pictures were very good and told an interesting story, but what he meant was there was not enough bang bang, Hollywood-style shots of gunmen blazing away. This is a very, very good book. It gives you an outsider's view on lots of wars which have dominated the world for many years. And it's worth a read. Sean Mack, I've started listening to Betrayal at Little Gibraltar. Makes you wonder how many other stories that are hidden like that are hidden in plain sight. Lots. Calvin Gasper, Jeff Beeler, on happens on Trento. What word the Captain HMS Dartmouth used on Straffing AH flying boats in original English? Unpleasant? Jeff Beeler, I like With the Old Breed better than Helmet for My Pillow. I distrust any book where someone goes off alone and kills someone with a knife. No evidence, and killing someone with a knife is rare. Jeff Beeler, Carl, too long since I read it. Killing someone with a knife is rare, apart from it seems in jungle warfare. That does it. It's still not common, but it's not as rare, it seems, in that scenario. Thomas Rottler, good day to you. Good day to you. Tis Russell. Hello. Haven't seen you in a while. Hope you're okay. But Jeremy Bowen is a good book. A very, very good book. Oh, and a quick update while I'm talking about books. You will soon be seeing a whole series of book come out called 4 Random Books. Those of you who are patrons will have already seen one episode of it, as an example. But there are more. There are a lot more. In fact, there are currently 18 loaded onto YouTube, all scheduled up nice and neatly. So that is actually going to mean that when they start off, they're going to be coming out every week. They're already scheduled in and put in till the end of this year. And I'm going to be starting on January 2021's this week. So, yeah, plenty of those coming. Sam Thompson, is it possible for you to make an audio version of your book? Like Audible or something? You really make the history come alive. I would like to do an audio version of the book. I think you should do audio versions of history books because, for starters, I have friends who are blind and audio books are great for them. Yes, you can read through your fingers and all these sort of things, but I always think that's another level of translation. And that's like translating into a different language, really, because it is its own lexicon, it's its own phraseology. And I read little bits of Braille, but I'm nowhere near as good at it. And I've got one friend who can actually type. She is sighted, but she specializes in helping and teaching blind children. And she can type in Braille as quickly as she can type in normal. In type in Braille is not normal as she can type in traditional alphabet. And yeah, it changes in translation a bit. It does change in translation a bit. So I think that could be quite a cool thing to do. I just recently bought it in Hungarian. It would certainly improve my English to know whether he used the same adjective on Admiral Acton's sudden boarding his ship and strafing aircraft. Unpleasant does sound like a British turn of phrase to be used. Carl Gaspard, read Killing with a Knife. My grandfather, I barely knew, adamantly called his World War I bayonet my weapon. He served on the Italian front in artillery, so I have a chilling feeling that their position was interesting. I'm adding in the last bit. That honestly wouldn't surprise their position overrun by Italians. Carl Gaspard. I honestly wouldn't surprise me, and ammunition and resources were sometimes scarce up there. So yeah, it's like there's also all sorts of stories of Gurkhas and Kukuris in the jungle warfare. So that's that might be coloring my image, but I let's put it this way: if someone said they did it in the middle of northern France, I'd be very, very skeptical. If someone said they did it in the plains, Ukrainian plains, against between the Germans and Russians, I'd be less skeptical. In the jungle, in the Pacific War, they were not nasty. Things got really, really nasty and really, really close. Really, really close and really, really nasty. JP, who would you most like to read the audio version of your book? I'd be quite tempted to ask Drac to read it, but... Or maybe Jamie. Jamie could be quite fun to read it. My mum could be quite good as well, my girlfriend, but, yeah... Patrick Stewart. Come on, go for Captain Picard. It would just sound so educated if he read it. It would. Let's just sorting this out to make sure I add in this. Let's see. Yes, 19. Fleet. By William Stone. So, I have now a policy. You might have realized this from a few weeks ago. But as I go through, I add in the books as we get to them, so that I create a sort of flowing timetable. William Stone, forward by His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, hero of the fleet. Now, William Stone died on Saturday, 10th January 2009, aged 108. He received a hero's funeral. Born in rural Devon, he joined the Navy during the First World War, travelled the globe just before the British Empire light began to fade, and saw in action in some of the most significant sea battles in the Second World War. Afterwards, he returned to Devon to run a barber shop, an altogether more peaceable existence. As time passed, he became one of a dwindling number of men still alive who served in the Great War. This meant that for some of the most momentous anniversaries clocked up recently, including the 90th anniversary of the end of the First World War, William was a guest of honour. This autobiography bridges two wars and encompasses remarkable episodes and adventures. It was an ordinary life lived in extraordinary times. He died at a time when the Navy is attempting to embrace new ships that bear scant resemblance to those that William knew and face the challenges of a world that shrinks with every bold technological advance. His was a different kind of boldness. This is his astonishing story. Now, apart from disagreeing with quite a hefty chunk of that last chapter, last paragraph, this is a very, very good book to read. It's got some very, very cool pictures. Very cool pictures that show the Navy in transition. And they really do show the Navy in transition. And this is one of those books which is worth reading. Now, before I get to quotes, I'm going to try and catch up on some of the questions because they've been going through. Let's see. Good morning, Yickers. Have you seen the size of Braille books too? Yes, they are colossal. They're a weightlifting contest sometimes. I swear, listening to some of them. Jerison, do you feel there's a humorous British Army PSA for jungle warfare in a school in Brunei? It shows a 15-year SAS veteran mistreating a parang like a machete, and it bounces straight off bamboo into his leg. That wouldn't surprise me. Jeff Beeler, who would you... I've answered that one. Hello, Federico. My father, as a boy, once had an axe bounce off wood into his leg. Yes, chopping things with metal objects is not fun or safe. Might have had a few things done to me as well in the past. Calvin Gasmet, in trenches and such, an entrenchment tool or bayonet due to its stopping power is as much useful as a pistol. Yep. Rapid Razorback, in jungle warfare, I would be more worried about infection than bleeding. Yeah, that is half the trouble. That and what else can come after you and into your bloodstream. Federico, I have a question for you. Did DRN destroyers have Marines aboard, especially tribals, and also from which size did they start having Marines aboard? Well, as a rule, it was unusual to have a significant Marine detachment aboard a destroyer. Those ones on foreign stations did usually have some Marines. It's like they even turned up on gunboats in foreign stations. Home fleet destroyers, it was rarer than than the eastern fleets, sort of the China Station, Indian Ocean Squadron, that sort of thing. However, saying that, the tribals did plan to have detachments aboard, and in their boarding actions, they certainly did have some with them. But more often than not, you found Marines manning a turret on cruisers, and from them on upwards, having significant parties aboard. So usually Marines were on the bigger ships. That's what happens when you can't see more than 5 feet. Yeah. John Man Abbott, hello. There's a reason that 16-inch bayonets remained popular with US Marines in our Pacific Force until 1945. Yeah. Jeff Beeler, true. Trench raids often use bayonets in Modern Warfare? They did. Bayonets, it's if you're fighting close quarters. Look, these sort of things, bayonets, knives, if you're fighting very, very close, that's what happens. It's if it's close quarters. If you can engage... And this is what I often find interesting, because when we're talking about modern weaponry, we're often talking about the capability for it to engage things many, many miles away, and it's brilliant, it's lovely, it looks great on paper, and then you go, well, what are the rules of engagement going to be? Are the rules of engagement going to allow you to use that weaponry at the maximum range? And if not, is it useful? And how's that going to change your approach? Jerison, my father got an Argentinian bayonet through his left forearm. My great-grandfather jumped over slit trench and got the same in his left bum cheek. Sod's law, my child is going to get bayoneted too. I honestly, I would be, I'd be wearing some very interesting body armor if I was your family going anywhere near combat. Disrespectful. Knives are good when you don't have ammo and you can see Places like Burma, where you don't have ammo nor can you see, made it wonderfully reliable. Lest we forget mud jamming actions. Yeah. Benona, hello. Won't be here for long, as we'll be having tea soon, and I'm running a Call of Cthulhu game. The session is likely to see an increase in number of inmates in the asylum. Yeah. Then for him, read books of the blind. There was a blind man at my shooting club who was a better shot than me. There are a few who are very good shots. Rapid raceback, swords for raids. The Royal Navy did used to carry them, and I think, seeing as Royal Navy officers still are required to have swords with them on their ships, never know, they might come out again. Okay, yeah, we'll get back to book. So, which ships did he serve on? Well, a lot. There are some interesting maps here of all the of some of the trips he took in his life, and some of the places he went. But he served on Tiger, Hood for the Empire cruise, 1923 to 4. He took part in Africa, Operation Dynamo, Operation Dervish, Malta, Atlantic convoys, and the Williams ships. Right then, let's start on 229 and have a look at his ships. HMS Tiger, HMS Hood, HMS Chrysanthemum, HMS P40, HMS Eagle, HMS Haribel, HMS Fanat, HMS Tenedos, HMS Carlisle, HMS Salamander, HMS Newfoundland, right, and let's see. He's got a lovely. There's a poem in here somewhere, and I spotted it again a second ago. Mm-hmm. He and his shipmates were warned not to discuss the events of that terrible night with anyone. The cover. The loss of men and machines was a blow to the Allied High Command. Among the dead were all the trained beach marshals destined for Omaha during D-Day. Their absence certainly cost lives and created confusion in one designated part of the beach. However, their primary concern was that 10 men in the lost ships were of senior rank and security clearance and knew details about D-Day landings. Had they been hauled out of the water and interrogated by the Germans, the entire plan, now in its advanced stages, would be in jeopardy. Eventually, the men were identified among the dead. Having cracked German codes, eavesdroppers at Bletchley Park listening station also quickly reassured planners there was no evidence of the Germans knowing that the invasion would be in Normandy. Enormous cardboard camps, complete with fake tanks and even campfire smoke constructed on Kent coast, made Germany think the invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, a view confirmed by double agents. The incident was hushed up, again to preserve the integrity of D-Day plans. Victims were included in the D-Day tally, while survivors were sworn to secrecy. However, the incident was related in the Stars and Stripes newspaper distributed among US soldiers as early as July 1944. It was also mentioned in several books that appeared in the late 1940s and 1950s and lay on file without a secrecy classification in the US National Archives. Only much later did the incident become a talking point after efforts by Slapton resident Ken Small to establish a permanent memorial to the dead men gained momentum. Using his own money, he hauled a Sherman tank lost off Slapton in a different exercise onto the sands and made it into a memorial that publicized the events that happened at Slapton during the war. With some justification, there was a string of denials from the American hierarchy that there had been a cover-up about the E-boat attack. But there were still more deaths among the visiting Americans at Slapton. According to local accounts, several residents claimed that there was a mass grave of men who had been killed after live ammunition was distributed during Operation Tiger. So men were mistakenly shot dead by mock defenders as they made their way up the beach. And there was talk that another glitch in communications meant a planned rocket attack from ships out to sea rained down on land-based troops. Other than accounts by local people, there's little to substantiate exactly what went on in Slapton Sands when it came under fire. One day in early June, Devon residents awoke to find their streets deserted. The colony of US soldiers who had learned to call Clapton home had moved on to the Normandy beaches, where they were fighting in the bitterest of beach combats. The sudden departure caused shockwaves in the community, many of whom never discovered what happened to the uniformed friends they made in those 6 months. Now the uprooted folk of the South Hams could return to their homes and farms in the wake of mine detectors, who got to work eliminating unexploded ammunition scattered across the area. But to delight the locals, the Americans had discarded tools, equipment, and canned goods, all of which were put to good use. However, some South Hams people had died in the interim. Others had found a new life elsewhere. The close communities that had once been a hallmark of the neighborhood were never the same again. The sound of birdsong, which vanished from the area during the 1944 nesting season, soon returned to Slapton Sands. A rampant rat, rabbit, and pigeon population was quickly brought under control, as were the weeds that choked field and gardens. However, the Royal Sands Hotel, that once perched proudly on the shoreline, was in ruins. Ultimately, it became the site of a car park. In July 1954, the US Army presented the people of this area a granite obelisk monument with a bronze plaque, thanking the people of the South Hams area, who generously left their homes and land to provide a secret battle practice area for the successful assault on Normandy on 6th of June 1944. Their action resulted in the saving of many hundreds of lives and contributed in no small measure to the success of the operation. The area included the villages of Blackharton, Chillington, East Allington, Slapton, Stokenham Street, Torcross, together with many other outlying farms and houses. It's a good book, but it's got lots of things in there. The reason I chose that particular section I did is because I want it to be noted that it's got lots of stuff in there which is beyond just Navy stuff. It's got lots of personal accounts, and it's worth reading. It's a good one. So, Here the Fleet by William Stone. With foreword by His Royal Highness Prince Andrew. Jeff Elam, when did our Marines get light machine guns, and when do they get submachine guns? World War One. For light machine guns and submachine guns. Well, I seem to remember them having some early examples of what would become submachine guns in the late 1930s. Definitely in World War II they had them, though. Frederick Vega, Gun Jesus did a very good explanation of bayonets and other World War I trench weapons and its limitations. Oh, cool. Silly Manacos. I'd rather deal with a threat before it comes within arm's length, and definitely before biting and gouging is an option. We all would prefer to. Nicest way. There is the English are largely descended from longbowmen, who especially like dealing with threats when they're a long way away. Frederick Vega, how many years was he in the Navy? I've tried to do this calculation a bit before, but I'm thinking it must have been about 30 to 40, between 30 and 40 years. Yeah, nearly 30 years. And a bit of other stuff as well on the side. Jefferson, I believe the Royal Marines would retain the Lewis gun, but with the heavy barrel shroud removed. This tended to annoy World War I veterans who were told that the Lewis gun wouldn't work without the shroud. Yeah, it did. It annoyed many. There were lots of things which annoyed World War I veterans. There's a nice discussion going on about Scholar Gladiatoria at the moment. It is an excellent channel, I do agree. I do enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Right then. So, next book. And it's always fun to go next book. That's what I was going on. Sorry, the joy of having the phone, the cameras up means I get my phone vibrating with messages going, there is something moved here. And I look and go, what has moved? Mm-hmm. So, next book, which is entered into at the... I'll go for 37-minute time. Is 8 Lives Down by Major Chris Hunter. And it's a cool book. It is a really, really cool book. It's got some interesting pictures in. Major Chris Hunter has served with a number of Special Forces counter-terrorism units and during his career has been deployed to many of the most dangerous battlefields in the world, including the Balkans, Northern Ireland, Colombia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. For bravery during his Iraq tour, he was awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Okay. With a look of cold defiance, he heads straight towards us. He can't be more than 50 meters away. I hold up my hands, gesturing for him to stop, but it's no use. The guy's on a mission. He's probably doing about 60 miles per hour now. He's going to write off the rover, Vince says. Feck the rover, I reply. I'm not at my most eloquent right now, but the damage he'll cause to our snatch is the least of my worries. If it connects, we'll all be killed. He's almost on top of us. Feck it. This is serious. We need to do something now. I lower my rifle, deliberately enough to leave him in no doubt about what's going to happen next, then bring it back into my shoulder and aim it straight at his face. I scream at him to stop. Whatever happens, Vince, I say, don't shoot this maniac until I tell you to. 20 meters, I disengage his safety. Stand by. 15. I place my finger on the trigger. Fecking stop! I yell at in one last desperate attempt to make him come to his senses. He does. Just about to apply second pressure, he slams on his brakes and pulls hard right, sending his car into a flat spin. He rebounds off another vehicle, dances into adjacent lane, and screeches to a standstill. Vince and I look at each other amazed. How the hell did he miss us? We get ready to go and check him, but as we're about to step down from the rover, a huge truck comes screaming down the carriageway and piles straight into the back of him. There's a huge bang and screech of torture metal. Dust and smoke fill the air. The kamikaze's car is catapulted into a ditch. I think I've had bad days, but Jesus, this guy has redefined the term. I find myself praying for the poor bastard under my breath. What's left of his vehicle is well and truly mangled. Let's feck off out of here, one of the lads shouts. Come on, go, go, go. We're not going anywhere, I say. That guy's going to need stitching back together. Once again, the lads are right and I'm wrong. As the dust settles, the Iraqi climbs unsteadily out and lights a cigarette. There's not a scratch on him. Having screamed through the city with pedals planted firmly to metal, we finally make it to the scene of the explosion, an area known for its designation on our military maps. Blue 19. It's just on the edge of Quadama. Through the Thieves Market sells IED components at where the Thieves Market sells IED components at bargain prices. I'm met by a female officer from the RMP. Her petite manicured hands are still trembling, and her warm blue eyes are fighting to shut out the images that are playing over and over in her mind. She and her team were on their way back from Shahiba in an 8-vehicle convoy. As they headed through the urban wasteland of northern Basra towards Blue 19, the 7th vehicle, her vehicle, was engulfed by blast and hit by hundreds of fragments from a high explosive artillery shell detonated in a drain beside the road. The truck was sent careening across the road as a complete write-off. Both she and her driver emerged unscathed. This is the latest in a line of astonishing things I've witnessed over the past 2 days. The Sunni bomber teams have been hitting us like men possessed with their keyless car entry system RCIEDs, and the Shias have been doing their best to keep up, yet not one of our troops has been killed or seriously injured. Yesterday, a young trooper from the Household Cavalry came within a whisper of losing his life. He'd been pulled up by the Sergeant Major of B Squadron that morning for monging it. being shoddy out on the ground, and was given the rifting of his life. When you go out of these gates, you'd better fecking start switching on, McIntyre, he told him. And when you're on the top cover, I want to see both hands on the rifle and your weapon in the shoulder. Otherwise, there'll be more fecking dramas than the Second World War. McIntyre's ears must still have been ringing later in the day when he was providing top cover in the lead vehicle of a 4-vehicle convoy travelling along Route Topeka, just south of Basra. They'd just been waved through a police checkpoint when one of the patrol noticed the Iraqi coppers flashing a light to the civilian cars behind them, aiming to stop them entering the road. Instead of having his weapon resting on the roof of his vehicle, as he had done every day previously, Trooper McIntyre pulled it firmly into his shoulder. As his vehicle passed a lone palm tree in the central reservation, there was a blinding flash and shards of white-hot shrapnel shot past his head at warp speed. A fraction of a second later, a razor-sharp chunk of bomb encasing embedded itself in the butt of his rifle. It knocked him off his feet and destroyed the weapon completely. But if he hadn't taken his RSM's threat seriously that morning, it would have taken his head clean off. And that's from the end of chapter 13. It is a very, very good book. It is a very good read, and it's very interesting stories. Is it history? Well, it happened in the past, so yes, technically it is history, but it's a personal history. So it's opened all the subjective things that are in there. But it's a good one. Let's see. Greg Salsky, good evening. Sorry I'm late. Don't worry. John Emmett, Dr. Clark, I've been loading up on books for a seminar class this semester. My mother-in-law had to buy us a bookshelf for our first anniversary. Just the bookshelf? Just the shelf? Wait until you're buying them by the bookcase. Wait until you're buying entire extra property buildings to be added to your house to build up, take out book space. That is the level quite a few of my friends, including myself and my girlfriend, are at. Jerison, surviving a bomb in a snatch is more unlikely to survive. Is more likely to survive than being on foot. Disfrontable. I got rather engrossed there. Disfrontable made me think of my family and friends. This is a very good book to read. Okay, it's a very accurate history, and it's one of those full of content works. It is full of content. And it's got lots of stuff in here. If we find another one, that's my next favorite one. Will takes a long draw on his Marlboro and asks me what we're doing to stop them. I tell him that about a week ago I spoke with Steve Harrison, the brigade's logistics squadron commander, and an old mucker of mine from Sandhurst, about how to reduce the number of attacks on his vehicles. We agreed the best solution was to stagger the timings of the supply convoys coming over the border from Kuwait. Until then, they'd been arriving in Basra every morning between 0800 and 0900. You could have set your watch by them. But if our plan was to stand any chance of being implemented, we needed to get it cleared by brigade headquarters. So I asked Colonel Sanderson to help us. Brave man, he observes. I tell Will I knew the colonel was going to be a tough nut to crack, but despite his fearsome reputation for not suffering fools gladly, he's scrupulously fair. If anyone was going to see the sense of this, it was him. He just asked me to leave it to him, and true to his word, went off and squared away with the chief of staff. The morning attack stops within 2 days. So what went wrong? Will asks. Why are they being hit again now? Unfortunately, someone on the upstaff seems to have missed the point. When they were ordered to stagger the timings, the message must have got lost in translation. Instead of staggering timings, the lunatics just shifted the 8 a.m. slot to 9 p.m. Needless to say, the insurgents spotted it immediately, and the convoys are now getting hit at night. It comes as no surprise to either. What about the cowboy, he says? I heard the explosion from my office. He's talking about the Chevy outside the A&E hospital. I wondered when he was going to bring this up. Yeah, it was quite a rascal, I tell him. How I went back to the palace afterwards, got washed up and went over to the dining room to grab some scoff. Everywhere I looked, people were staring at me. I guess they must have heard the explosion too. I felt like a dead man walking, Will. His expression hardens. That's because you are, Chris. He takes another long draw under his cigarette before continuing, I'm seriously starting to think you've lost the plot. What were you thinking of running past a car bomb? You might be a guru when it comes to defusing these fucking things, mate, but you're a gold chain short of a Greek if you think you can withstand the blast of one. He tells me that the intelligence report suggests the car bomb was intended to kill me. The only reason you're still alive is that because of its proximity to hospital, the terrorists expected you to deal with it by hand instead of with the robot. Perversely, perhaps I smile to myself and wonder where I'd be without the support, guidance, and incessant lecturing of my wise friend Will. I try to work out how to subtly change the subject. Mark, the EOD staff officer, appears. Chris, another task has just come in for you. It's serious. Let's go for this one being 48. Honey. Right then. So, next book. Was $8.99, now £1. The words which will make any historian start parting with cash. I think I bought it in a discount bookstore. Unsurprising enough. It's reduced to £1. Rapid race back. They draw straws. I'll give it to new guy, Dr. Clark. Yeah. Hello, Night Heron Productions. Hello. Daniel Freeman. I think at one point I must have had the most militant posties in the country, as their union HQ was between the local sorting office and my house. That was all your fault, Daniel, I suppose. Richard Hughes, just give your postman a Christmas tip and they will take care of you. Very helpful. We do. Chocolates. Boxes of chocolates. Always a nice thing to leave out. The Universal British Bribery Method. Chocolates. Now, Stephen Ambrose does a lot of research for his books, and he always gets good pictures together. Really good pictures. This is definitely one of them. And this is a good book. Now, Daniel Freeman has immediately put a point together. Stephen E. Ambrose makes up in US patriotism what he lacks in historical rigor. I wouldn't say... Look. Stephen Ambrose is not a historian. He's a storyteller. That's what I treat him as. He takes a great historical events and he turns them into something for television or the big screen. Really, that's what he does. And that's why if you do buy his Stephen Ambrose book, or you buy his Pegasus Bridge, or all the other options and many books he produces, that's fine. They're a good starting point. There are many books which are produced which are good starting points. They're not necessarily... Let's put it this way. If I saw a student was quoting through and all they were quoting was Stephen E. Ambrose, I'd probably go and read some other books. But I wouldn't tell them off necessarily, because... Okay, whilst it might be more with a scriptwriter's eye in some respects than it is with necessarily a historian's eye that he composes these books, they are composed rather well. They're compelling history. So this is the point. And they have got good maps in, and we all know I'm a sucker for a good map. Lieutenant Charles Middleton saw parachutes everywhere and parts of gliders scattered all over. You could see where they had gone through the hedgerows, leaving wings behind, some burned and some still intact, still though not many. Then he saw the most improbable sight. Not far from the battle zone, a farmer was ploughing his field. He had a white horse and was seemingly unconcerned about all that was happening around him. By 0800, many crews were back at base, having a second breakfast. In an hour or two, they were in the air again, bombing St. Lo and other inland targets. The RAF returned to Caen, trying to concentrate on the railroad station. The Germans in Caen, in retaliation, took 80 French resistance prisoners out of their cells and shot them in cold blood. In contrast to the near total success of the B-26s at Utah, the great bombing raids by B-17s and B-24s of June 6th against Omaha and British beaches turned out to be a bust. The Allies managed to drop more bombs on Normandy in 2 hours than they had on Hamburg, the most heavily bombed city of 1943, but because of the weather and the airmen not wanting to hit their own troops, most of the blockbusters came down in Normandy meadows or were carried back to England, not on the Atlantic Wall. Yet the B-17 pilots and crews did their best and in some cases made important contributions, certainly far more than the Luftwaffe bomber force. At the top of the elite world of the Allied air forces stood the fighter pilots. Young, cocky, skilled veteran warriors, in a mass war fought by millions, the fighter pilots were the only glamorous individuals left. Up there all alone in a one-on-one with a Luftwaffe fighter, one man's skill and training a machine against another's, they were the knights in shining armor of World War II. They lived on the edge, completing in the present, but young though they were intelligent enough to realize that what they were experiencing, wartime London, the Blitz, the risks, were unique and historic. It would demean them to call them star athletes, because they were much more than that. But they had some of the traits of the athlete. The most important was the lust to compete. They wanted to fly on D-Day, to engage in dogfights to help make history. The P-47 pilots were especially eager. In 1943, they had been on escort duty for strategic bombing raids, which gave them plenty of opportunity to get into dogfights. But by the spring of 1944, however, the P-47 had given up that role to the longer-range P-51. The weapon that won the war, many experts say. The P-51 made possible the deep penetrations of B-17s and thus drove the Luftwaffe out of France. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a single-engine fighter with a classic lines. It was a joy to fly and a gem in combat, but for the past weeks, the P-47s had been limited to strapping runs inside France. The pilots were getting bored. Lieutenant Jack Barsfield flew a P-47 at 6:30 June 5th. He and every other fighter pilot in the base got a briefing. First came the announcement that this was the big one. That brought cheers and electric excitement I'll never forget. Lieutenant James Taylor said, "We went absolutely crazy. All the emotions that had been pent up so long, we really let it all hang out. We knew we were good pilots. We were really ready for it." The pilots, talking and laughing, fired out to go to their squadron areas, where they would learn their specific missions. Barsfield had a 3/4-mile walk. He turned to Lieutenant Bobby Burgain and said, "Well, Bob, this is what we've been waiting for. We haven't seen any enemy aircraft for 2 weeks, and we are going out tomorrow to be on the front row and really get a chance to make a name for ourselves." Berrigan bet him $50 that they would not see any enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Taylor learned that his squadron would be on patrol duty, 120 miles south of the invasion site, spotting for submarines and Luftwaffe. They would fly back and forth on a grid pattern. "We were really devastated," Taylor mumbled. "I looked at Smitty and Ayer, and they were both looking at the ground. All of us felt nothing but despair. It was a horrible feeling, and lots of fellows were groaning and moaning and whatnot." Taylor was so downcast, he could not eat breakfast. Instead of a knight in shining armor, he was going to be a scout. Terrible. It is a good book, though. It is a very interesting book, and it's a lot of interesting history in it. And Daniel Freeman, where I come from, we leave out box of chocolates for posties and for binmen at Christmas. It just seems nice. Disgruntled. I wouldn't mind being a postman. It's all walking. It's what people are supposed to do. Or get fat when they retire if they stop walking now. Yep. Then I was thinking more about some of his other books. Band of Brothers is more based around the oral histories of the soldiers, and their recollections have value. At the risk of sounding awful, I'm not sure whether Ambrose did a huge amount of his own research and writing, or whether he became more like Tom Clancy as a brand. Also, the topic of his books that I've read are probably some of the most contentious or frequently revised events of war, e.g. D-Day in 6 June 1944. Not longer range, but that is besides the point. I know. There are issues in his books. It's there. Being orders. I'm more bothered by the TV film types who have advisors available but ignore advice because their idea of equipment terminology looks better, and Joe Public won't know the difference. Well, actually, there's an interesting story there because I like watching Todd Cutler of Todd's Workshop. As he always says, "Hello, this is Todd Cutler of this is Todd of Todd and this is Todd of Todd's Workshop, and I'm Todd Cutler." At the beginning of everything, and I laugh a little bit. And he makes a lot of points about medieval armor and how it has to look right for the filming. Not just has to be right in terms of the history, but it's also got to be right for the filming, for the actor you're dealing with, for, the reason when we talk about real knights and real fighting, they had full face plates and all these sort of things. Whenever you see a fight in most television programs or movies, they don't have it round their face, or they have something weird on, or they have a half covering or something, because they're a very expensive actor who you've paid a lot to show their face off, and you don't want to hide it. It's the same with World War II accuracy. The amount of times I've seen cockpits of supposed World War II aircraft, and I've gone, wow, that's rather neat and tidy, and oh, that's a huge canopy. Lots of space in there, or all sorts of things, or ships from World War II, and they've got this and that, and you just notice things and go, yeah. Radars don't look like that, and radar screens don't look like that at that time, but then that's what they want them to be. You've got an early World War II, something that's got a PPI full indicator, which goes round and round, and so it shows you things, all that on a sonar, and you're going, that isn't right, but it's necessary for the movie. It's necessary for the show to give it the realism which is understood by the public. So you have to draw a line and go, well, that's its basic point, is to get people interested in history and to entertain them. It's my job. I'm a historian. It's my job to give people the facts of history so they can make up their own minds about what happened. And occasionally I throw in a little bit of analysis to try and make a case. That's not the job of the movies. The job of movies is to entertain people. And as long as they get within a ballpark, I am not going to spend my life critiquing them, because they have a whole range of factors they have to deal with. Saying that, though, there are some movies which I just can't watch, because I just spend my time critiquing them. Jerison, I would rather be a scout than a knight. I'd rather be alive than dead. And if I'm doing a scout duty, then I'm definitely coming back. It depends on what they're trying to make. If a documentary, then it is unforgivable. But if a drama, there is a point where authenticity must give way to economics. And, yeah, looking good. Calvin Gasbert, the B-47 Jug as a fighter with classic lines. I like that craft, but it's the last thing I would have said about it. Honestly, I often think of the P-47 more as a land-going version of the Big Cats. That's what it reminds me of more, rather than being classic lines. It's less of an interceptor. Richard Hughes, showing a bit of appreciation goes a long way. Remember to treat people like human beings. I am president of the Always Bribe Your Librarians department. Always bribe your librarians. Daniel Freeman, warfare doesn't translate well to the screen. Helmets, side faces, hide faces of expensive actors, formations, and the extent no one stands out, or else they get shot in a shield wall. Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons you don't stand outside a shield wall. Oh. Also, has any the movies I've seen where testudos have managed to start running, and you sort of go, well, "That would have been not good." Steph Thompson, Dr. Clark, I take it you've now seen Greyhound. Not yet, no. Jay Richardson, rubber helmets. In movies and TV shows so they don't injure themselves, how stupid do you have to be to injure yourself with a helmet? Not how a helmet works. You have no idea. They can do all sorts of things. Greg Lasky, there's Dr. Clark. There's a similar effect with sound in space. Sound doesn't transmit in a vacuum, of course, but early audience reacted badly to not hearing explosions act. Kilo 19, P47, Big Heart. Reason they named the A10 after it. Pretty good tribute. Yep. Jerrickson, in the film Towering Inferno, Steve McQueen had one of those American fire helmets brims cut by about 6 inches so that they could see his face properly. It turned out firefighters liked it, and it was a big success. Disgruntled. So what you're saying that Kelly's Here is a good film on merit, not the fact that there's no real tiger. Broadly speaking, yes. Although there's also there's all sorts of movies where there's no real tiger, no real tanks, and both sides are using various American tanks from the 1950s and 60s. Greg Sarsky. In the Battle of Britain movie, the Brits Poles have their goggles up and the Germans have goggles down in the cockpit shots. Yeah. It's just, sort of goes, why do you have your goggles up? Sean Mack, my problem with Midway is none of the people acted like real people, let alone who they were historically. This is why I prefer the original movie on Midway than the more recent one. Federico Vega, that's why I like the Battle of River Plate. It's very accurate and not perfect, but close. Yes, it is. Battle of River Plate is absolutely exceptional for that. Calvin Gaswood, as P47, I recommend strongly the YouTuber Greg's Aircraft and Automobiles. It's P47 series. At altitude, it was a nasty surprise, a dogfighter, but looks like a big steam engine on the runway. Welcome to the Hellcat and Wildcat as well. Huge engines. They're basically built around them. We're not getting into Pearl Harbor, Martin Dock, mainly because I want to actually go to bed this week, and I could spend a long, long time listing all the faults in the Pearl Harbor movie. All the faults. Pretty fair. Tora is the good one. Period. That is a good one for Midway, for Pearl Harbor and all these things. It is a good movie. Right. Let's see. Right then, next one. Wild Blue by Stephen E. Ambrose. Stephen E. Ambrose. Wild Blue brings to life another extraordinary band of brothers, the men who volunteered to join the American Air Force and undertook some of the most demanding and dangerous jobs in war, focusing on the men of the 741st Bomb Squadron, and in particular the crew of the Dakota Queen. These are the boys who turned pilots, bombardiers, navigators, and gunners of the B-24s, who suffered 50% casualties during the conflict. With extraordinary talent for bringing alive the action and tension of combat, Ambrose sweeps us along in the B-24s as their crews fought to the death to reach their targets and destroy the German war machine. Now, my one big problem with Ambrose is that he actually regularly tries to make the case that bombing in daytime was sensible during World War II. And even with fighter escort, I really don't consider it the most sensible thing to do in the world. It's bad enough, difficult enough at night when you're facing off against radar. You can be more accurate in daytime, but while you're in contested airspace, let's be honest, night gives you a bit of cover. Frederick Vega, Toronto deserves a good movie. I'm available if you need a historical assault, anyone, for the Battle for Toronto as a movie. I will do the historical consultation. I will also invite Jamie from Armored Carriers along as well. The two of us combined will make sure you get everything historically accurate, including the fact that the Italians get knocked out for a bit, but they do manage to get back out again. Rapid Razorback, I want an HMS Campbelltown movie. Again, I offer my services. I do charge, though. I have very good agents. Night Harrier Production, Midway 2019 was visually there. The acting was meh, but the physics of what was displayed on screen felt like a child was directing the picture. And I mean that in the worst possible way. Yeah, there were issues. Nick Waters, one pilot in Eagle Squadron split spit P-40 fightback and Adula raid because protagonist. Yeah. Well, you know, makes it fun. I liked Hacksaw Ridge. I like how destroyed Hugo was from being in World War One. Potentially. Myself, one of my favorite movies of all time was Heartbreak Ridge. Then from Toronto and Dieppe and Saint-Nazaire raid won't get in big movies unless someone finds a way to insert Americans. I fear Canadians won't do. You never know. Britain has a burgeoning film industry, and well, someone might like to get creative. If you could make Admiral Cunningham Patrick Stewart, it would probably have enough draw to get it. You know, if you think about what you need is some very big name actors with the appropriate accents who could take lead roles. If you can't get Americans, you need big named actors involved in it. And that's the thing. If you can go through some various big named British actors and Canadian and Australian actors and get them involved, Hugh Jackman probably could be found a role. These sort of things, you could probably make it. Right, so, Wild Blue. We will get into this in a second. I'm just going to answer some of the questions. Night Reduction. I'm worried about any remake of Sank of Bismarck. From an article I read, a Hollywood exec wanted to turn Ted Briggs' story into a revenge quest where instead of heading to UK, he goes off on one of the British warships. Eh. Right, so that's Thunders. Every American born before 1936 remembered exactly where he or she was when they heard the news that the Japanese attacked the US fleet in Pearl Harbor. George McGovern was in his second year at Dakota Wesleyan. It was a liberal art school that emphasized philosophy, history, English, literature, foreign languages, and the arts. He was taking a required course in music appreciation taught by Robert Brown from Oberlin College. Brown was a violinist. He assigned his students to listen every Sunday to the New York Philharmonic Orchestra's radio concert on NBC and write a critique. 19-year-old McGovern was listening and writing notes saying he thought the violin should be a bit more prominent. Strictly BS, he recalled. But I don't know how Brown thought a bunch of college sophomores were going to critique the New York Philharmonic when the program was interrupted with the news flash that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. I have to confess I never heard of Pearl Harbor, didn't even know where it was, but he could tell from his father's reaction and the way he turned the radio up that it was a serious matter. That afternoon, he decided that he would have to be involved in the war. The following day at school, everyone was talking about it. The instructors had maps to show the students where Pearl Harbor was and what it meant. McGovern knew that his decision was correct, and that there was no logical alternative to this than for all of us to get involved. Some of the Dakota Wesleyan students already were in the service. Norman Ray, who had persuaded McGovern to take the civilian pilot training course the previous year, was already in the Army Air Corps. Another student, John Nowling, a star on the college's football team, had been killed in a training accident. McGovern talked to others who'd been in the course and to a couple of faculty members and made up his mind. Along with 10 fellow students, he decided to drive to Omaha to enlist in either the Army Air Corps or Naval Aviation. They borrowed the president's car and the dean's car. In a little school, you can do things like that, he recalled. And indeed, the students called many of the faculty by their first names to drive down to Omaha. Their only question was Army or Navy. They debated all the way to Omaha. Being from South Dakota, they were all landlubbers and had an instinct that it was better to be landing and taking off the ground than from water. Still, there was a sentiment that the enemy couldn't bomb you as easily on an aircraft carrier as at an airbase. But shortly after they parked their cars and began looking for recruiting stations, one of the young men said he had heard that if you joined the Army Air Corps, you would receive a free meal ticket for the cafeteria next door. On the basis of that unsubstantiated rumor, all 10 joined the Army Air Corps. The rumor turned out to be true, and they got a lunch worth about 75 cents. It wasn't bad, McGowan commented. Roast beef, gravy, and mashed potatoes. That's rather nice. Right. Baba UK. Don't worry. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. Kilo 19. Heartbreak Ridge was actually a Ranger unit, not a Ranger. That doesn't surprise me, but I still enjoy Clint Eastwood in it. Mainly because he's teaching people how to prepare for war in a way which I can sort of understand. Very, very good. Patrick Stewart as Cunningham, what a dream. That would be quite cool. I think he could pull off Patrick Cunningham. Calvin Gersberg, World War I Adriatic, where insert USA celeb, captain of the US sub chaser, accepts the surrender of SM Zurich to become USS Serial. Stephen Beckman, Wild Blue was part of Ambrose's plagiarism controversy. Are there historical inaccuracies too? Few issues. But it's okay. Gordon Collins, I thought the B-29 only became really effective when they started low-level nighttime area bombings. B-29 was the one over Japan. Dr. Clark, don't forget ABC was Irish, born in a suburb of Dublin. Yes, but I still think Patrick Stewart could do his accent. Patrick Stewart is about 80, but I still think he could do quite well. Frederick Vega, 75 cents of food decided the branch. Doesn't surprise me. All sorts of things decided the branch. Rapid Razorback, what if you did Taranto with 1,000 land-based bombers a la handbag?
Rapid Razor, Patrick Stewart doesn't age. We can all wish to look that good at his age. That is my main thoughts when it comes to Patrick Stewart. If I look that good when I'm 80, I'm going to be very, very happy. I'm feeling this is going to be. So I'm going to put this whole saying this. Put in the comments below this video when you have time to think about it, who you would like to play what parts in a Toronto movie. Okay, let's do this as a sort of a bit of a game and put this in the YouTube comments down below. Or thought experiment. The criteria is they have to be famous enough actors. You have to be able to load it up with enough famous actors and potentially actresses if you want to add them in, of British, Canadian, Australian, and Italian, because we should have both sides represented in it. And Italian mixed to play the roles and to draw in enough star power they would get funding. Because let's be honest, this wouldn't be a cheap movie to make. We are talking several hundred million, probably, the budget. Sort of, let's say, 200 million budget. It's got to be the really top rank of celebrities. And let's have a go and let's see who you guys come up with, because guys and girls come up with, because frankly, it'd be quite interesting to see down below. And what I will do is, if there are some really good ones, I'll bring it up in bilge pumps, and I will torture poor Jamie with making him actually remember there are actors and actresses in the world, and he has to learn their names because I'm evil. Frederick Vega, what if the British had the same resources the Japanese do Toronto? If the British had had a second carrier, well, it's going to sound strange. Okay, Toronto, you have to remember, is a multi-carrier operation. It's supposed to be Illustrious and a second carrier, Eagle, attacking from the Eastern Mediterranean, while Ark Royal attacks Genoa and other parts to cover a convoy. It isn't done as a strike. If you've been planning it all out really as a strike primary, you would probably have found some way for Ark Royal to link up with Illustrious and to combine the two together. Because if you could have done that, there wouldn't have been anything really left alive. And well, we all see what the Royal Navy do with what they have. Imagine you add in skewer dive bombers and treble the number of swordfish. You go from roughly 24 swordfish to 72. There isn't much of a fleet left at that point for the Italians in Taranto, because that's a lot of torpedoes in the water, so that's a lot of damage done to those ships, and none of them are coming back from the damage that would have done. There were some of them which were brought back. The Italians were at sea again, but, you know, it just wouldn't have worked. Mm-hmm. So you don't really need the full Japanese Kido Batai approach to do Taranto, because if you do, then there frankly isn't anything left. But, you know. It's an interesting idea. It is an interesting idea. Now, this is definitely into the fraction books category, but it's not into the fraction in terms of its content. Its content is very, very good. Its content is Major Dick Winters' Beyond Brand of Brothers, and it's his own autobiography.
Let's see. Oh, 1, 23, well, 24. Beyond Band of Brothers. Right. I'd go for a balanced flight. A fight in the Med with Toronto as just one part along with other actions. Calm gas, but I had a flash of Tom Cruise as swordfish pilot with several fruit flies between his teeth. I don't know. You have to. It's going to be an interesting thing because you have to think about ages, appropriateness for playing the part, i.e., how they fitted up with reality, but also, do they have enough potential pulling power to bring in the money together necessary for it? Because, as you have all pointed out, it's a British story. So it's only getting made if there is enough star power behind it to counterbalance the fact that it is a British, not necessarily an American story. So you've got to sell it to not just American audiences, but a global audience. So, this book now. Beyond Band of Brothers by Major Dick Winters. And it's again full of good pictures. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's funny after seeing the television program how different it is seeing the real people. On the 7th of June, on June the 7th, General Taylor visited battalion headquarters and complimented the troops on the excellent job they had just finished. Meanwhile, Easy Company attacked and secured Angerville with the help of 2 light tanks. We were now placed in reserve, with our principal responsibility being defence of the 506th Regimental Headquarters. Later I was told of the hard fight around Saint-Cum-du-Mont that Dog Company had that day, and I heard that Captain J. Gross, the company commander, had been killed. Gross had been conferring with his battalion commander when an artillery shell struck a nearby tree, killing him instantly. Lieutenant Joe McMillan assumed command of D Company and remained the commanding officer for the rest of the war. In my estimation, he was the best company commander in the 2nd Battalion. Also killed was Lieutenant Colonel William Turner, 1st Battalion's commanding officer. When Turner raised his head out of a tank turret, he was suddenly shot dead by a sniper in plain sight of many other men in the forward line. Combat in Normandy was proving an extremely dangerous business. During this time, one of our major problems was the disposition of dead bodies. The countryside was now littered with dead Germans, abandoned vehicles, and smashed equipment. Dead cattle and horses lay everywhere, often with their legs grotesquely pointing towards the skies. Within days, their carcasses began to bloat and smell in the sweltering June heat. Regiment hired French civilians to burn and bury these animals, but the stench was overpowering. Work details also buried German soldiers where they found them, sometimes in mass graves. Grave registration officers collected and identified American dead who were temporarily interned at unit cemeteries. Later, many of these bodies were interred in the American cemetery that sits atop the bluffs overlooking Omaha Beach. In addition to the destruction of livestock, the Norman agriculture suffered dramatically during the campaign in Normandy. The Calvados and La Manche departments of Normandy formed a richly agricultural region, best known for its lush pastureland as well as apple cider. Ample rainfalls ensured that the landscape remains green for most of the year. Dairy products included milk, cream, and various cheeses like Camembert, Lavore, and Pont l'Evêque. The agriculture production declined not only because of the direct destruction from shelling and bombing, but also because crops and livestock went days and weeks without proper care and attention. The dairy industry, which once characterized Norman agriculture, virtually ceased to exist in early June 1944. Once the fighting moved towards the interior of France, however, the Norman countryside returned to its pre-invasion state, and today it remains one of the country's most prosperous agricultural regions. Another problem that we encountered in Normandy was the French cognac and calvados, a distilled apple brandy that is usually drunk between courses to clear the palate and then as a finale to a good meal. Not aged 10 to 15 years, calvados will take the skin off your throat, as many Allied soldiers discovered within days of the invasion. Both cognac and calvados lay in abundance in every Norman village and farm. Lieutenant Harry Walsh had found a barrel of cognac, and I was convinced that he attempted to drink it all by himself. On one occasion, he passed out in the middle of a road, and there he was, lying on his reserve parachute, popped up in full view of the enemy. The Germans began zeroing in on Welsh, and I had to get out of there and grab him and pull him off the road. My God, he was lucky. There were times when I talked to Harry and I realized later that he hadn't heard a word that I had said. It's not because his hearing was bad. We got that problem straightened out in a few days. Sleep was still tough to get at night for a variety of reasons. Actual fighting or even the anticipation of combat created constant tension among our soldiers. Equally bothersome was the huge mosquitoes that inhabited the swamps in front of Caratan. Prior to the invasion, the Germans had flooded the countryside in a futile effort to discourage Allied planners conducting airborne operations. The flooding caused large, stagnant pools of water, which proved a fertile breeding ground for swarms of mosquitoes that dive-bombed us every evening. In our advance towards Caratan, you could see pillars of mosquitoes extending several hundred feet into the air. There was no escape, since our troops were not equipped with mosquito nets. It's a good book. It is a very good book, and it's Major Dick Winters, and it's in his own words. Mm-hmm. Seth Thompson, Dust Clark. Regarding Toronto, Hugh Jackman, Ryan Reynolds, Keanu Reeves, Hugh Laurie, and Patrick Stewart. Ooh, that could be good. Rapid Razorback, Tom Hardy, Sean Bean. Could we get a Conroy out of retirement? I think for the right role, you could probably get people out of retirement as well. Oh. Let's put the quotes. Let's put the suggestions down in the comments below, and as I said, we'll look through them, and I'll get bilge pumps onto it. We'll have a look at it and talk about it. Frederick Vega. They don't put up parts in the history books, the stench of the dead bodies. No, they don't. They don't put it in. Nick Tasia, is this a list of actors hypothetical, as in can include those now dead or just those alive now? The criteria is it has to be actors alive now, relevant to the parts, with enough pulling power collectively, financially, that the movie would actually get made. So if all these actors clubbed together, they would have enough sales potential that the production companies and all the things would be happy to invest in making it. That's the criteria. Going to be back in a second. Yeah. Ooh. That was some weird noises. As I was saying earlier, you have now scheduled for your delectation videos, book review videos, called 4 Random Books, all the way from their starting point in the September up till end of December, literally December the 30th. Oh. Rapid Racer. Any good memoir that illustrates life at sea and war at sea that are actually in print? I might be going to get to one at the bomb. I might be going to get to one. Step up paying. Good evening, Dr. Clark. I'm currently on the Bilge Pumps website, and there is nowhere you can play the audio file for the 12th episode. Can you help? It should be working. It should be. I played it myself earlier, so just recorded. Just sent in the edited versions of 13 and episode 14. Mm-hmm. Right then, let's put this one in. Yes, I would expect. I would hope that, thanks to The Hobbit and various other things, that there would be plenty of British actors who you can use. I'd say you can sort it all out, but it's going to be interesting to see what you suggest. So, Calvin Gaswood, The Expanse did well without brand name actors. That's true, but then you're not asking for them to make a movie or anything about historical events. You're asking for sci-fi, and sci-fi is quite popular. So that's the thing. And you can sell sci-fi to pretty much any audience. There is a ready-made audience for sci-fi, whereas is there enough ready-made audience to go for Taranto movie without? We'll see. Bad Guy 8829, what do you think the Japanese would do if the US didn't move the Pacific Fleet to Pearl Harbor? And how do you see the war going if there was no Toronto or Pearl Harbor? If there's no Toronto, then honestly, the RN are still fairly strong against the Italians. If there is no Toronto and no Matapan, and then there's still Crete, then there could have been a problem. But but thanks to Toronto and Matapan, when there's Crete, it's okay. If there's no Pearl Harbor, then how does the war in the far? If the US Navy is not based at Pearl Harbor and the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, then they aren't going to do it. There's going to be a whole load of ships which aren't sunk, which are available for the US Navy to operate with at the beginning of World War II, out of their involvement in World War II, and that probably makes the job for the Japanese that much harder, because then there's a fleet ready to respond. It's just, yeah. Basically, without Pearl Harbor, there's no real good point for the Japanese. It's just not good for them. Right. So let's see. The Zanzibar chest. Now, how do I describe this book? No other African correspondent has been so successful in blending both hard reporting and laddish on-the-road antics within a telling personal historical framework. Hartley evokes the excitement and pathos of the modern continent. He is perhaps the best musical writing about the real Africa today. My father was the closest thing I knew to the immortal. Our Father who art in Africa, I prayed as a child of 6. He'd always been there. When he died, I couldn't believe it. I had moments when I felt haunted by him in ways that were almost physical. They were a comfort to me. At home on the Indian Ocean coast, I swam off the beach and felt he was in the water around me. On the upcountry plains, I imagined his bones were billowing up in the dust behind the nomads' herds of cattle. I clung on, but I felt him slipping away. In my stricken state, I longed to pluck something back from the oblivion. The day came for us to go through Dad's belongings. His private territory at home was a coconut-thatched veranda overlooking the beach. He kept his writing desk there and a single bed made of mountain cedar, lashed with thongs of raw hide from Unks shot many years ago. Some of his clothes were still hanging up in there, which described a life of Sandu-like simplicity. A few khaki bush shirts and shorts, the kokori wraps we wear in Kenya like sarongs, as well as several pairs of camel skin sandals. In the corner of the veranda was a Zanzibar chest, carved with skill modern Swahili carpenters have forgotten. The old Kampor books bore a design of lotus, paisley, and pineapple, and it was studded with rivets tarnished green in the salty air. When I opened the chest lid, cobwebs tore and something scuttled into a corner. In the chest was the skin of a lion Dad had tracked down after he'd killed one of his best bulls, a hunting horn, a flute of apricot wood, and a stack of files. These last contained reports on missions to southern Sudan, livestock projects for the tribes of Karamojong, botanical studies, and copious notes about camels. Always restless himself as a younger man, Dad had spent his last years devising schemes to help Africa's nomads remain on the move, beyond the reach of those who wanted to settle them. Inside one file were my father's handwritten memoirs, on which he had been working for years. I opened a second file and reached down to grasp the pages. The instant I touched them, they began to crumble in my hands. Time, heat, and the drenching humidity had ravaged them. Mildew dust the covers, giving off that scent of forgotten. The translucent geckos that roam our walls had laid their soft ivory eggs along the spines of the notebooks. White ants and silverfish had eaten into the papers, leaving a web of brown caterpillaries. The tracks threaded through written words and underlined paragraphs and burrowed into months and years of recollection. I began to read the papers. I quickly realized I had stumbled on a secret that had been buried for half a century. Here were the diaries of the man named Peter Davy, my father's good friend. Ever since I was a boy, the story of Davy had crept in and out of a conversation at home in vague, half-finished sentences. The tale had always been there, yet my father never properly talked about it. Davy was a silence, a shadow that moved constantly out of the corner of one's eyes. And now, as if it deliberately dropped into my lap, here was the full and tragic rendition of Davy's life. What I found in the Zanzibar chest was a story of lives so utterly different from my own, so exotic, set in another part of the world in another time. I had never believed it in any great cause. I was sent to fight no wars. What I admired most about my father, Davy, and those like them, is that they were men of action, whereas I was ever the observer, not the participant, which is the main reason I'm able to be here to tell this story. There is a quote from a television show which I enjoyed greatly when it was on the air, and it did 3 seasons. And this young producer is asked why she wants to go and do a story in Africa. And she said, because it's the next place that American troops are going to be sent to die. We don't do enough study of Africa. Asia's problems are made visible by China's overarching ego and its actions. Europe is on the doorstep of so many of the world's major communication nations that it gets a loud hailer regularly. South America is an interesting mix, but is often loud enough on its own that it does get some study. But Africa is segmented in our studies. Africa is treated as North Africa, as this part of Africa, that part of Africa, as if you can magically divide an entire continent up into chunks and go, we only need to know about this bit, when you need to learn about all of it. To even have a hope of knowing what's going on, let alone understanding what actually is going on, this is a good book for starting off on many, many thoughts on that. The Zanzibar Chest. It's a really cool book. All right, then. Danny Freeman, read Taranto's Sea War in the Mediterranean film. Can I be a location scout? We all want to be a location scout. Richard Hughes, are you going to finish your Anglo-Japanese diplomacy 1930s series? Yes, I am. But I've moved on quite a few in my capabilities of putting together these videos, and it's part of my plans for my research week. And I am going to start scheduling in research week, so I have pre-recorded videos but no lives that week, so I can do the recording beforehand and then have a week to basically do all sorts of research stuff and any sort of other things work related. Take care, John Shea. Take care. Jeff Beeler, a John Frost biopic. Surprised one has not been made, or a Band of Brothers style series based on Second Para. Danny Freeman, if doing British Airborne, there's also the company of Arcs and Bucks who took Pegasus Bridge. Oh, we all want that one. Bud Guy 8829, do you think a successful movie or miniseries could be made based on Neptune's Inferno? And if a naval version of Band of Brothers could be made, what ship or ships would you use? Oh, I'd use the Tribal class destroyers. They're the only ones which go everywhere. And they do go everywhere. And they're still in service. It's like if I was talking about British history, but you're talking about Rome. That's what it's like when we talk about history. The thing is, the history of Rome does encompass the history of Britain. And therefore, you should talk about the history of Rome when you're talking about the history of Britain. It's a good book. It's worth a read. Somalia still filled a space on the world's atlas with its pink frontiers etched by European imperialists a century before. Those arbitrary borders had marked the separation between it and the rest of the world, but now even the fantasy of what the space inside the pink line should mean was gone. Schools, law and order, taxis gone. All that was left was land and people and guns. I heard gunfire from an alley off to one side. Let's go down there, I yell. No, 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 Hoss moaned. No, 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 no. Oh, come on, Hoss. Hoss shook his head and said again, no, 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 no. Suddenly, the boom of a grenade going off filled the alleyway with dust and debris. Thanks, Hoss, I thought. We hurtled up the hill, swerving to avoid debris, smashed cars and corpses, running dead traffic lights, and going along whichever side of the road we pleased. When the trucks came to a halt, we got down off them and moved from house to house on foot. We were on a street running towards the Indian Ocean when I looked down to see that my feet were ankle deep in brown leaves. I thought of walking along the banks of the Isis in Oxford on October days, beneath chestnuts and beech trees shredding the leaves. But there is no autumn on the equator. Hoss was looking down too. What and why and fucking how, I said. Then I realized they were banknotes. Millions upon millions of banknotes. Money, said Hoss with a big smile. He took a picture of a group of old men stuffing into sacks. The soiled bills spilled out of blasted doors between marble pillars. It was raining money in the ocean breeze. We turned the corner and the bills were replaced by wafting blue, green and pink sheets of paper out of the ransacked ministries. Gangs were blowtorching the bronze statues of Somalia's national heroes off their marble plinths. Down fell Hamad Gran, who had defeated Christian Abyssinia in the 16th century. Crash went the poet and anti-British guerrilla fighter Mad Mullah Syed Mohammed ibn Abdullah Hassan on his rearing stallion. Hoss clicked away. The gunman smiled. Looters manhandled the yellow sofa, an old iron boiler and a grandfather clock onto the back of a diesel truck. Holes were being opened up every few yards along the road. Men were pulling out the copper wiring and pipes. I saw men slaughtering a camel. It bellowed as they cut its throat and hacked it to pieces with pangas. The fire-ruined Catholic cathedral, once one of Africa's largest church, was roofless, and the clock tower was cleft down the middle and about to topple. Inside, Jesus was headless on his cross, and a militiaman cradling an M16 with a personal stereo system clamped over his ears was doing a jig across a floor spangled with shards of stained glass. The city was a fragment of what it had been, but the atmosphere was electric. The militias had liberated the nation not only from dictatorship, but also from modern civilization. A Dionysian orgy of self-destruction was now taking place across Mogadishu, in which everything was smashed within the space of hours. Priceless Muslim artifacts from the museum and the mosques, hospital equipment, factory plants, power cables, computers, libraries, telephones exchanged. The Somalis thoroughly enjoyed themselves, and I got a contact high off them. On days like this in the news business, I grew to understand how easy it must be for normally ordinary people to want to participate in riots and football match hooliganism. A queue of civilians was huddled at a roadblock before a gang of rebels. As each person was waved through, another came forward and began uttering a litany of names. My guide with the flaming red hair said the people were recruiting their clan family trees. The genealogies tumbled back generation after generation to a founding ancestor. It was like a DNA helix or a fingerprint or an encyclopedia of peace treaties and blood debts left to fester down the torrid centuries. I was thinking how poetic the idea was when, bang, a gunman shot one of the civilians who fell into the blood gushing from his head, was pushed aside onto a heap of corpses. Wrong clan, said my flaming-haired friend. He should have borrowed the ancestors of a friend. It is a good book. Rapid Raceback. The problem with naval engagements as books or movies is they're too big. As books it works, as TV shows possibly. As movies it's problematic. Jeff Beeler. John Frost, the second parrot, starts with the Brunvel raid, then North Africa, Operation Fusar in Sicily, Operation Slapstick, at Taranto, ending on Battle of Arnhem, September 1944. Sav Thompson, Dr. Clark, Haida does need a walk quite badly. Don't tempt me. Frederick Vega, and the history of Rome, sir, the foundation of Europe as it is today, especially law, military history, trade act. Yeah, it does so. Danny Freeman said, re-HMS Ashanti. Did the captain have any cool bits and pieces like the Maori war gear worn by the captain of HMS New Zealand and Jutland, or anything similar for the tribals? There was for HMS Maori, who got the exact same Maori war gear. as New Zealand, but didn't seem to get the same armor from it. They had a shield and a bell provided by the Asante people, and they weren't things to wear. Rapid Razorback. Okay, bad example. What I mean was talking about Rome as a part of the UK or Hungary or Caucasus. They are different places, people, and have more immediate history. It's surmising a huge area. Rapid Razorback, what's the plan when you actually have to go back to work? When I actually have to go back to work, which it does look like I'm going to be doing a lot of teaching from home, the plan is to keep the Thursday lives definitely going and the Sunday Bruships. Definitely. Possibly replace the Mondays and Tuesdays with deep dives and transfer the patrons to Thursdays, the patron videos to Thursdays. And also continue with what's going to be a Wednesday for random books. So there'll be 2 pre-recorded topics a week sort of thing for random books, and there'll be an introduction video and there'll be a live discussion every Thursday. That's my plan at the moment when I go back to work, but that's when I go back to work properly. And I'm going to try and keep to 2 lives and a Bru Ship, so 3 lives a week for as long as I can. What I'm getting at is, well, look at areas of Africa, like me saying Europe and European. I'm not talking about it as one broader people. You can't talk about Africa as broader people, but you do need to understand the complexities. But you can't also section off Africa and go, we need to talk about East Africa's problems and not include, well, North Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa, all the different areas of the things. Rep Razor, were there books on fighting, raiding, and rivers during the war? There have been. Budge Guy 8829. I read that the last horse cavalry charge in World War II was done by the US Army and Filipino Army in 1942. Were there any others early in World War II? Well, there was the Polish. And the Italians as well. Not sure about that bit, the last one being US Army and Filipino ones, because I seem to remember the Italian cavalry charged the Soviets at one point and managed to overrun them. So we're going to go for, well, it's almost 2 hours. Okay. Oh, 1:59 then. Now, this book is I Sank the Bismarck by John Moffat. It's a fairly cool book. And it's all about a gentleman who is, unsurprisingly, considering he's talking about sinking the Bismarck, a Fleet Air Arm pilot. And one of the ones who took part in the strikes aboard against the Bismarck. And his claims, which are variously supported, are that his torpedo was crucial in stopping the Bismarck working. Jerison, if you want to get technical, one of the Lance regiments on the northwestern frontier was used against Parthians during 1944, albeit it was obviously not part of the wider conflict. Dan Freeman, filming on various World War II era museum ships would be cool. Hyder, Belfast, Winchester, whichever one is at Chatham, and the Americans have some carriers, plus some in Australia for sunshine filming. Rapid Raceback, if you get dragged to read your book, the sarcasm may cause something to explode. The sarcasm combined of both of us could be interesting. So, right, let's see. I Sank the Bismarck by John Moffat. I really like this book, but I'm always skeptical because whilst so many aircraft were involved and so many were firing torpedoes, and torpedoes have such a vagrancy to an extent that whilst I am sure he's correct, I am less so. If Ark Royal was one of the most modern carriers in the world, then Argus was one of the oldest. Her keel had been laid down in Beardmore shipyard in Glasgow in 1914, and she was originally intended to be a passenger liner for an Italian steamship company. Instead, the Navy commandeered her and modified her into an aircraft carrier, and she entered service in 1918. She was an odd-looking ship, with a big flat flight deck laid over her hull. I heard her referred to unkindly as a floating shoebox. There was neither the funnel nor the bridge superstructure you would expect to see in most carriers. The funnel gases were directed so that they came out under the flight deck at the stern, and there was a small retractable bridge that rose and fell on the edge of the flight deck, according to whether flying was taking place or not. She was lying in the Clyde in midstream when I first saw her, and I was taken out to join her from the pier by one of her boats. I travelled through Paisley on the train from Aberystwyth, but my trunk had not arrived. Each day I went back to the station for it, but never managed to locate it. After an agitated phone call to my mother, I was assured that the trunk had been forwarded promptly. On the third day, I was told that we were due to sail on the morning tide to join up with a convoy. I panicked. My trunk had still not arrived. The station office had been trying to find it for 2 days now with no success. That afternoon, I rushed to the station again to be told that my trunk had finally been located in Glasgow Central and had just arrived on the local train. Relieved, I spent a small fortune on taxi to help me carry it as far as Greenock Pier. Dashing to the signals office at the end of the pier, I asked the petty officer on duty to signal Argus for a boat to collect me and my trunk. I was horrified to get a signal by return saying that all boats had been hoisted and stowed and the ship was due to get underway. I was in a serious sweat now. This was my first posting on board a vessel, and I could imagine the repercussions if I failed to make it on board. It was a serious disciplinary offence, but there was also the shame and damage to my reputation as well as my own pride. Then I noticed a fellow in a motorboat and asked for help. After some wrangling about the price of petrol, a fiver was waived, a good week's wages in those days. The trunk was loaded on board, and we set off in pursuit of the carrier. As we got close, I could see the commander on the quarterdeck, and I shouted to him, "Help me." In retrospect, what he must have thought, seeing a young RMVR Sultan in a speedboat, bouncing about in the wake of the ship and yelling at the senior officer for a hand as though he was a railway porter, beggars a belief. He merely replied, and with a voice that carried remarkably well, "Come along the starboard side." There was an opening in the side of the hull just above the waterline that I assume had been originally intended for passengers' luggage when the ship was designed as a liner. I urged the boatman to go flat out, and as we passed the quarterdeck and drew level, a seaman opened the baggage port. The huge ship above me was gathering speed, and my boat started to bounce above it, about in the wake and the increasing chop of the estuary. The boatman and I heaved the trunk on board. Then I stepped onto the gunwale of the speedboat, and sensing the boat rising up on a crest wave, threw myself on the hatchway, where a couple of seamen caught me and dragged me safely aboard. One of them straight into my uniform and just to my cap, as I were a small boy, while the other soldier said, "Captain's compliments, sir, and he will see you in the wardroom." I was on an aircraft carrier at last, but it was quite clear I had not made a very good impression. Oh. And guys, by the way, Soviets did have a few combined T-34 plus Cossack frontal assaults too. I can understand why, because actually mobile infantry on horseback is probably quite good at certain points of World War II. Gary Sasaki, there were some cavalry operations during the Chinese Civil War in 1947, but off the top of my head, I don't recall if they fought dismounted or if there were any charges. Will not be surprised, though. Nick Waters, this is like something out of a Carry On film. Yep. On the 19th, one of our patrolling swordfish spotted a merchant ship flying Dutch colours, but the ship's name and her port of origin on the stern were painted over. There was a strong possibility that this was a supply ship for the Scharnhorst, as it was heading west at 270 degrees. On board the Ark, we formed the opinion that it was the Wakama, which we knew had left Brest for the Azores. We believed that in the waters of those neutral islands, German U-boats were in the habit of resting up and rendezvousing with the depot ships. It was an important contact, and the swordfish was detailed off to maintain touch discreetly. Later that day, one of the final patrols before nightfall spotted a tanker that appeared to be running half empty, heading due east, as though making for Brest. By the time the swordfish had returned to Ark with this information, it was too dark to send out any further patrols, but next morning I was one of 9 swordfish that took off at 0740 to comb the ocean for the 2 mysterious ships. There are plenty of unanswered questions. What were they doing in the vicinity? Were they a clue to the presence of the German battlecruisers? Had the tanker just left them after refueling at sea? Where were we going to take on these 2 powerful raiders? The German warships were fast, modern ships and well armed. Scharnhorst had hit glorious with a salvo from her 9 11-inch guns at a range of almost 25 miles. A phenomenal performance. If we did make contact, Renown, our flagship, would have her work cut out against both the big cruisers, and we would certainly attempt a torpedo strike. Please note, of course, this is HMS Renown, which early in the war had driven off both Scharnhorst and Eisenhower. So, whilst Moffat was probably worried about the contact, Renown was going, "Come to me, my pretties. You got away last time. This time I've got a carrier to slow you down. You won't go anywhere. You're mine. You're mine. You're both mine." As we all know, HMS Renown was basically, well, we talk about tribal class destroyers having sort of attitude issues. Warspite, Renown, most of the armored carriers have these issues as well, but on a slightly larger, more glint in their eye scale. At the briefing that morning, I was given a bearing that should lead me to the tanker if she had kept to her course and speed overnight, and after an hour of flying, we saw something on the horizon. We dived down to intercept it and flew low over the side of the ship, then around about 200 feet. We saw no movement on board at all. Flying round again, I could read Bianca painted on the bow, but there were no signals or any sign of the crew, neither was she flying any flag, which was a bit strange, as normally ships are keen to identify themselves as neutral. Then Dusty realized that this was one of the tankers that had been captured by Scharnhorst several days ago. She was being operated by a prize crew, so the surmise that she was heading for Brest was correct. At this point, I was not in a position to do very much. I wanted the tanker to heave to, so that a ship from Force H could recapture it, but all I had was my forward-firing machine gun. This was the 303 Vickers that was mounted on the fuselage, on the right-hand side of the cockpit. A weapon that I had never fired before. I doubted for a moment whether I could remember how to use it at all. Then gradually the drill came back to me. Make sure the bolt is at the rest position, pull up the high-pressure piston rod, then pull back the gun lever twice, ease the bolt forward, and the gun should be ready to fire. So I went down to 50 feet, put some shots across the bows, a universal signal to heave to. Aiming about 50 feet in front of the ship, I pressed the button. The gun was fitted with an interrupter mechanism to prevent bullets hitting the propeller blades, so the rate of fire was extremely slow, rather like the chiming of Big Ben. I felt that I could have fired faster using a revolver. It was noisy, the fumes of the cordite filled the cockpit, and every shot made the fuselage shake. There were splashes in the water as the bullet struck, but had the message got through? I flew around the ship, and there's still no sign of any activity. I flew higher to see if I could see any of the ships in the vicinity, and spotted Renown about 15 miles away. Then Dusty shouted, "Jack, look at the stern." I went down, and Bianca was definitely lower in the water, Then a group of crewmen apparently appeared and started to lower a lifeboat. I suddenly realized they had opened the seacocks and scuttled the tankers, and were now trying to abandon the ship. The bastards! I was not going to get cheated like that, so I turned and made a low pass, firing forward a machine gun at a lifeboat. I had no intention of hitting the boat or the sailors trying to get in it, but it was not a very gallant action. They didn't seem to take any notice. I shouted back to Hyman, my tag, "Can you shoot out that boat?" He had already seen what was happening and didn't need to be told. 4 short bursts from his Lewis gun hit the lifeboat, and the splinters of wood flew off in the air. Hyman never missed. It did the trick. The German sailors climbed back aboard and went to see if they could do something about the sea clocks. I then flew back to Renown and signaled them about the situation. They sent off a whaler with a boarding party to recover Bianca and take the German prize crew as prisoner. The Germans, however, had not gone back to save the ship. They instead started fires on board. The boarding party from the Renown recaptured the ship and put out the fires. Eventually, she was towed into port. When I returned to Ark, there was a general air of excitement on the briefing room because 2 more of the 90 little fish had taken off that morning, had located another 2 of the tankers seized by Scharnhorst, Sank and Podkap, which were now also being sailed by German prize crews. Shortly afterwards, Sank was to be taken, but Polycap eluded recapture. 3 Fulmar fighter aircraft were dispatched later today to search for her. They are much faster than the swordfish, so it was hoped that this would allow them to make an interception while there was still some daylight left. After nearly 2 hours, one of the Fulmars returned and flew over the Ark, signaling by a handheld Addis lamp for emergency landing. The Ark swung out of line into the wind and the Fulmar landed on. The crew was in no danger, but they had urgent news. They had flown north and they had seen 2 ships in the haze. They were not Polycarp nor any other captured tanker, but 2 German warships, Scharnhorst and Eisenhower, which had evaded us and the whole of the Royal Navy in the Atlantic for weeks. The crew of the Fulmar had been unable to report it immediately because their wireless had broken, so they had been forced to return at top speed to Ark to pass the information on to Admiral Somerville in Renown. At last, the ships for which we had been carrying out an exhausting search over the last 12 days had been sighted, but this crucial failure in communications was serious. The information about the enemy warships was at least 1 hour old. It's a good book to read. It's full of humor. And it's got some cool pictures. Did I mention that at the beginning? Session, hello. Just arrived. Is it okay to ask all kinds of stuff, or have we having a theme? It's okay to ask all kinds of stuff. There is a sort of theme to the books, but the questions are whatever goes. Budguy8829, why did it take so long for the elevators move to the side of aircraft carriers, and did any US battleships still have torpedoes going into World War II? I'm not sure about the latter question, because I'm not quite sure how quickly they managed to actually... I know they have plans to do it, but I'm not sure how quickly they actually implement those plans. Also, I think it means whether you include some of the ships sunk versus when they come out of refit post Pearl Harbor, whether they have them or not. And elevators start to move to side of aircraft carriers quite early on, but it's a case of what are you building your aircraft carrier for, how are you building it, what's your plans, basically. These things can all have an impact in terms of where you place your elevators. The British are placing their elevators inside the ships, broadly speaking, centerline elevators, because they don't like to have open-sided ships. They like to have their hangars secure, sort of with things around them to protect them, because they like to protect the engineers, the aircraft, and these things, so the aircraft carrier can reuse them. Americans more likely are more concerned with carrying maximum number of aircraft, so tend to want to have the maximum amount of hangar space. Don't have shops around it, and so put the hangars on the edge. Or at least towards the edge. Mm-hmm. Daniel Hume, Calvin Gove, are you going to expect poor Alex to try to say that? Of Richard Hughes, of course. Go on, Daniel Hume, that would obligate me for feeding him at least for 2 days. Let's see. Calvin Gasmed, station. Atranta Elni Swordfish, Tamasara Spetsa Mozivik Gizirg, Celeb Amishi Sijetsk, which I think is about the Toronto movie stuff we're doing. And now I'm wishing my girlfriend was here because she could probably translate that and say it a lot better than me. Angson, Dr. Now I'm going to be imagining HMS run out with perpetual manical glee and impending combat. That's pretty much her. She was very pissed off that her crew was very pissed off that Starnhorse and Nice got away the first time. With Ark Royal to back her up, they were never going to get away. That was her plan. Rabbi Rosewood, any good books or people or events that you could do because the people or events are so absurd that you couldn't do because people are so absurd nobody would believe they actually happened? I had an interesting conversation with my editor of my tribal book about some of the stories that the tribal class destroyers got up to. And it's a case of, they did what? Yeah, they really did it. But they did what? The classic example is HMS Cossack and at Narvik. So, okay. You would expect her to stand outside the port and firing in. No, that's not getting into action. You can't get in without actually going over the block ships. So what she does is she rams through a block ship, balances herself on top of the block ship, and then starts firing from sitting on top of the block ship. That's not normal behavior. That's not what you should do. But it makes perfect sense from the idea of Cossack. My job is to take out these ships. My job is to take out this port and to stop it working. The only way I will do that is if I get as close to it as possible. So you put up block ships, I'm going to charge straight through. Rapid Raceback, Dr. Clark, I want the reading list for your classes. My classes are interesting reading lists. But that's why I've said there is going to be. I'm already sort of starting things which are going to be continuing on, no matter what happens with terms of going back or whatever. I think I can keep going permanently, and that's why I've started the 4 random book series, which kickstart in September. So, Sebastian, what are the absolute necessities to achieve ocean-going capabilities for sail ships? What is the absolute earliest time this could have been achieved? We have sail ships which we know are going ocean-going in times of the ancient Greeks and in very early Chinese papers. We don't have many coming from India, but that's because most Indian states seem to be quite busy beating each other up. The Polynesians seem to be traveling around quite heavily, as do the Peloponnesians. So we're talking a very, very long time ago. They do seem to be traveling very far. They might be skirting around the world, around the coast, but they also do seem to be sometimes going further than that. So, if you've got a good breeze and you can pick up the right currents, you can travel the world very, very fast, very quickly. Even in a very relatively small sailing ship. So, it's quite early. Jerison, why does my alphabet spaghetti and spoon make sparks in the microwave? Okay, so, Jay, here's the thing. Microwave is a form of radiation. It's usually in the 3 centimeter bandwidth. And it's microwaves. And, well, this stuff reacts with metals. And basically just don't put the metals inside, because it will either get very hot or very sparky, and either way, it could cause a very big boom. Okay? So don't do it. Nighthand Productions, how do you see the story you just read playing out? Had the full Mars wireless been working and Force H had intercepted Sharnos Nizar? I know I misspelled the name. You have either Scharnhorst or Nice now probably gets damaged, kind of like Bismarck, and they get slowed down. And then they have Force H flooding in on them. And the thing is, if they're out longer enough and there gets to be another strike, well, that becomes a different matter. Because another strike, if there's more than one strike launched by Ark Royal, that's going to damage them both. And then Renown is going to beat that as hard as she can. They have more guns, but Renown has 15 inches. So hers will have bigger impact. They have other ships they can call on in the area. Other battleships, but other hunter groups will probably be coming down for them. And they have a lot of cruisers and destroyers. And if the cruisers and destroyers do a night attack as well, let's put it this way. The odds are the fight would take place at night. And the odds are Renown has been upgraded and has all sorts of systems. So I'm saying that Renown might get heavy damage, but I think Sharnos and Nice now might not be there. Buddy Guy 8829. If Bismarck and Prince Eugene have made it to the Mid-Atlantic, what are their odds of them being able to return to port? Not very good. They might make it there, but the Royal Navy is going to do their best to stop them. Neil Woodhull. That's Clark. How much research weight do you give personal letters versus memoirs versus official histories? I usually will give the most weight to the most of those, depending on which one matches best with the empirical primary source material I can find. So if I can find a lot of personal letters from the time and memoirs, which broadly speaking agree, and to an extent share enough similar facts with the National Archive material, that I can prove enough of them. It's going to sound strange. It's the historian technique is to weight things by, okay, so this is the official history. This is the archive material. This is what I've got. This is going to be accurate to within a level. I can match this unit. This is all remembered correctly. Okay, so this has got this personal material has got details in it, which aren't going to be in here. But as long as I can match up enough of those details that I can show that this is reasonably accurate, then I can have reasonable amount of faith in this personal material. If I can then find multiple versions of this personal material which have a reasonable similar perspective, then I have a very accurate as I can make it without a TARDIS portrayal of the history. And I can report as such. And then it goes down from that. So what do you have? Do you not have any National Archive at all? If we're talking about Tsingtao, 1939, I have the Admiralty reports, but I can't find the Foreign Office reports. I have the Foreign Office reports from other events around that time, which tell me that these are the people I should be looking for. And the Admiralty reports mention those people. And I have the comms reports from the Admiralty, but not the comms report from the Admiralty with the Foreign Office or the Foreign Office comms report. So that's why I'm having to go. I want to go to All Souls College, and why I've applied to them for a visiting fellowship to go to Oxford for a term and spend a term in Oxford and basically spend my time sitting in the Bodleian Library where they have their personal records, because I can show those people were there. So now I need to go and look at their personal records, see what matches up, and then I can build up a history of the Tsingtao 1939 from that side. So that's it, the sort of technique you use. So I hope that answers your questions, Neil. Daniel Freeman, what iteration of Force H was this? It was Renown and it was Ark Royal. It was under some level. Daniel Freeman, it's not part of the folklore, but I once wrote that I wouldn't for Dr. Clark to pronounce SMS Vensinger without offering him Hungarian food. Oh. Severin, it's book theme since I'm writing it. Broad strokes, explorer makes it to the South Africa, then back shortly after the end of the second. By the end of the third thousands have tried to flee there. Daniel Freeman, I now have visions of opening up HMS Renown instead of something like the engine room. There's a manic tribal class destroyer hiding inside. Oh. Senator, how gets blown across the Atlantic? Svensson, how plausible would this be if the fella invents the Lantine sail? Fairly plausible. Very, very good. Tribal captains were clearly picked from the finest mental asylums. Let's put it this way, they were chosen for their aggressive nature. Calvin Gasman, for Hendel, crossed the Atlantic with a replica ancient Egyptian papyrus raft. Yep. Jerish, my joke has backfired. Jerish, the problem is you're a former soldier. We expect or fear what you might attempt if bored. Refugees, watching electricity sparks in the microwave is good fun. Yeah. And those 15-inch punches hard. They have fewer but larger guns, and those 15-inch punches hard. That's the thing with Renown, and they are very well armed. And she also has some town-class cruisers with her from memory, and, if I remember correctly, an E-class cruiser as well. So lots and lots of torpedoes, lots of destroyer torpedoes, lots of various things around. So that I wouldn't want to take on Force H if I was the Germans. They might well have more guns than Renown, but aircraft carrier, cruisers, and Renown combined are probably going to come out the win. Yes, I don't expect the British not to lose something, but they're probably the British would probably accept reasonable losses for the sinking of Scharnhorst and Eisenhower. Seven. Did the Phoenicians circumnavigate Africa? I found some books that mention them doing it on the behest of some pharaoh. How early did the ancients know the shape of Africa? They didn't. Let's persuade. Knowing the shape of Africa is one thing, but knowing they can navigate round it is a different matter. That they could do a lot earlier. Buddy Guy 8829. Would you consider Pearl Harbor the most important naval battle in World War II since it brought the US into the war? If not, what would be the second most important naval battle in the war? If not, what would be the second most important battle of the war? You see, the most important campaign of World War II, I would argue, is the Battle of the Atlantic. And the reason I'd argue that is because none of the other battles really matter if you don't have the Battle of the Atlantic successful and going on. Everything else, the Battle of the Atlantic is how you supply North Africa, how you supply Russia, how you bring across the army for the invasion of North Africa, how you bring across the army for the invasion of the Mediterranean, how you move stuff down to the Pacific and Southeast Asia and that sort of region. Everything has to flow through the Atlantic. So without it, you're in a big stump. However, that's a campaign more than a battle. Pearl Harbor. I would describe Pearl Harbor more as a turning point than a naval battle, because whilst it's more a strike than a battle, let's be honest, the Americans don't really get in the fight at Pearl Harbor. I know there's a lovely movie where a few fighters get airborne, but that's not really getting in the fight. Pearl Harbor is more like Taranto. We call Taranto a battle of Taranto, but that's really, again, it shouldn't be. They are strikes, and they're very successful strikes, but calling them battles suggests the other side really gets involved in the fight. So I would say Midway is probably the biggest one from the Americans' perspective. But from Britain's perspective, I would say naval battle. I'm going to be controversial. I'm going to go to Battle of the River Plate. And my argument for that being the most important for Britain is because it kicks off World War II. And it... How'd I put it? It announces the Royal Navy's here. It announces the Royal Navy's going to fight. Though everyone really sort of knew they were going to fight, but no one's quite sure whether it was going to be a global fight, etc. And that's the thing. The Battle of River Plate is important because it's the first battle which takes place far away from Europe, and it takes place very early in the war. Neil Woodall, thank you for the answer. My pleasure. Jebila, what Japanese language sources do you have for Stingtao? Very, very few. Almost non-existent. I have been hunting those as much as I can. And unfortunately, most of their records are completely destroyed. Actually, there's been more records, Chinese records of Singtao I've found than Japanese ones so far. Then, would 11-inch go through Renown's armor? Close enough, yes, they would. Jeff Beeler, I'm thinking of a carrier deck landing logs used in Sasha's Sword that revealed how the Japanese were defeated at Midway. There are some things surviving, but quite a lot of it was destroyed. And no much. Take care, Janewith. Right in. Oh, good lord, it's 8:30. Bud Guy 8829. If no one in the Pacific, do you see the US staying out of the war in Europe in World War II? They were already as in the war as they could be, but without fighting the war. They're basically bankrolling the British. Well, to an extent. Okay. Now, we've already done one on D-Day, so this seems sensible. Fighting them on the beaches. D-Day landings, 6th of June 1944 by Nigel Cawthorne. And I'm going to add this one in. Oh, thank you, Jim. It's very kind of you. Thank you. It's always nice to get super chats. Right then, so let's see. Hitler fell for this hook, line, and sinker, but Rommel was not so sure. He had been pitted against Montgomery in the desert of North Africa and knew his tactics. He suspected the Allies were giving the impression that they had more divisions than they had. If he was right, then there would only be one invasion, not three, spread across the Balkans, Norway, and France. The build-up of men and material in England led him to believe that it would come in France. To break through the Atlantic Wall, the Allies would have to concentrate their forces on one small area to punch their way through. In his inspection of the Atlantic Wall from Dunkirk to Biarritz, the best place to attack was in Normandy. He figured that the invasion would come just after daybreak at low tide, preceded by airborne landings. So he's prepared for landings on 5th, 6th, or 7th of June, depending on the weather. But he could not shake from his mind the idea the Allies must take a port to succeed. Cherbourg and Le Havre would be out of action by the time the invasion fleet appeared over the horizon, and he wondered how the Allies would give their landing force adequate air cover more than 100 miles from their air bases. Nevertheless, Rommel appealed to Hitler to move 4 of his panzer divisions to the west, ready for an attack on Normandy coast. Hitler refused. He remained convinced that the invasion would come in the Pas-de-Calais. Besides, his armoured reserves in the west were low due to Operation Zeppelin. The Allied military planners followed the messages being sent back and forth between Rommel and Hitler with interest via Ultra. They learned that, as a result of Hitler's intransience, only 2 understrength, poorly equipped and thinly spread divisions, with only horses and mules to move guns and supplies, were left to defend the Normandy beaches between Cherbourg and Le Havre. Only one of the Allied deception operations seemed to have failed. It was Operation Copperhead and involved Montgomery's double, an actor named Clifton James. He appeared in Gibraltar, ostensibly to organize an invasion of the south of France. The Spanish dictator, General Franco, was also asked whether he would allow Barcelona to be used as a base for the evacuation and treatment of Allied wounded. This was naturally reported back to the Germans. Unfortunately, while Montgomery was well known teetotaler, James got very publicly drunk and the operation was cancelled. Ironically, an Allied invasion of the south of France did take place. On the 15th of August 1944, the US 7th Army and the Free French First Army landed on the Riviera in Operation Anvil, later Dragoon. Operation Copperhead having failed to convince Hitler that a landing was planned in this area, there was only 4 German divisions to oppose them. Although Rommel could not convince Hitler to move panzers into Normandy, he directed his attention to strengthening the beach defences there. In May 1944, Allied air reconnaissance spotted a build-up of the defences and obstacles along the Calavados coast. The German 6th Parachute Regiment was moved into the landing area, and the 91st Air Landing Division, with specialised in anti-paratroop operations, moved into the Cherbourg Peninsula and occupied areas that were going to be drop zones of the 82nd and 101st US Airborne. These had to be moved, but as the timing of the drops had to mesh with the rest of the overlord plan, they could not be moved far. Suddenly it seemed that Fortitude had been blown. In fact, Hitler had spotted that there was a weak point along the Normandy coast and moved his troops to cover it. Maybe this was his much-vaunted intuition coming into play, but still believing that the attack was coming in the Pas-de-Calais, he kept his panzers to the east of the Seine. Admiral Canuck, using his faulted analysis of the situation, calculated that the invasion would definitely come on the 18th of May. When it did not, he forecasted it would come in August. Meanwhile, von Rundstedt studied the pattern of Allied bombing in May. When he noticed that they were taking out the Seine bridges, he began to think the Allies might make a landing in Normandy. But if they did land in Normandy, he believed that they would have to land on the Cherbourg Peninsula itself because of the need for a port. Even then, it would only be a minor diversionary attack. He still agreed with Hitler that the Allied main force would land in the Pas-de-Calais. It's an interesting book. And it's all about the story of Operation Overlord, and it's worth a read. It's a good one. Hi, Jack Hunter. What have I missed? A lot of books, but there should be a list down below. Derrick, most countries make good food. Some make it so hot I can't eat it, but I'm told it's good. Ooh. Rapid Razorback. Dr. Clark, I was doing research for my master's thesis 20 years ago on Normandy. I was amazed how much stuff was still sealed for security. Did you have any issues related to the Official Secrets Act and your book? Yes. And my PhD thesis has been, that's one of the reasons it's been held up, sorting out things. Been fun. Not too held up because of that and other things, but, you know, that's why it's not been visible yet. It should be visible this year to next year sometime. Jeff Beeler, learned Canadians at Juno could have had units on their objectives, but would have stuck out like a sore thumb and had pockets of resistance behind them. New IKB 4472. Hello. How many torpedoes could you get under an HE-11 Zwilling? 2 HE-11s joined at wings. I think it was 2, but I'm not 100% sure. I honestly, I wouldn't have liked to carry more than 1 in that arrangement. Carl Gasbird, probably around 10, but this big tug will not survive any decent flight. Torpedoes are very, very heavy. They might be talking about 10, but I hope they wouldn't be, because they're going to require quite a lot of support to operate them, and there's all sorts of things talked about them, but it's reality. I'm doing. It's having the space for it, it's having the ability to actually launch it stably, and they are big, unwieldy things, torpedoes. They are very big. There's a reason why most torpedo bombers are carrying one or two. Because they are big and unwieldy. And back in a second. 4 more to go. Oui, Michael. Yeah. Right then, let's see. Nighttime production. Very niche question. Feel free to ignore. It's also long again. Feel free to ignore. And thoughts on the 1421, the year China discovered the world by Gavin Menzies. It claims a number of things, including one of the flotillas of ships made it to New Zealand, which might be supported by a story told in the writings of a fire and tsunami that destroyed most of the fleet, and subsequently by findings of a possible meteor impact with tsunami debris found at Sturrock Island, found 150 meters above sea level and dated 1500 AD. So there might be something to it. Yes, the Chinese were sailing around. I've talked before about Admiral Zheng He and his voyages. The point I always make about Admiral Zheng He is he wasn't really exploring because he's mainly doing armed exhibitions to already pre-existing Chinese communities. And if those Chinese communities already exist on islands around the coast and down sort of around Southeast Asia and off to India and have trading concessions, then they've already been going there for quite a while. So that means they've been trading and moving around for quite a while. If Operation Overlord had failed, what would the consequences be, and would Allies just stick with coming up through Italy? That's probably what they would have had to. If Overlord had failed, there would have been a lot of dead people. And there would have been a lot of issues for the Allies to deal with. A lot of issues for the Allies to deal with. If Overlord had failed. It would have been a very, very big problem. We talk about Banks being too big to fail. Overlord was too big to fail. If it failed, it would not have been good. It's Iron Brew. so don't forget it. Jack Hunter, if Overlord had failed, what would the effect have been on Dragoon? Dragoon would have still been done. Because Dragoon would probably been reinforced and would have been more emphasized, but yeah. Tremak, you would lose Ike, and that is massive in and of itself. Would you lose Ike? Would he blame someone else? He's a good politician, as well as a fairly decent general. Danny Freeman, I have quite a few old history books about things from World War II, and some of them are about Overlord failing. I think a lot depends on the when, where, and how of the op failing. Did the Japanese, Bud Guy in 8829, did the Japanese have any plans to invade Australia? They certainly had ideas and dreams about it, but actually doing it, probably not. Interesting. Right, let's see. Let's put this one. Yep. So, With the Old Breed by E.B.Sledge is the next one, and this is a very, very good book. This is, well, I don't need to really recount this myself. I can just read from it. Johnny led us on through a jumble of rocks on Hill 140. Company K's line was in place along a rock rim, and we set up in the mortars in a shallow depression about 20 yards behind it. The riflemen and machine gunners in front of us were in among the rocks along the rim of Hill 140 facing east towards Walt Ridge, and the northern end of the infamous horseshoe. We had previously attacked that valley from its southern end. From the rim of Hill 140, the rock contours dropped away in a sheer cliff to a canyon below. No one could raise his head above the rim rock without immediately drawing heavy rifle fire and machine gun fire. The fighting around the pocket was deadly as ever, but of a different type from the early days of the campaign. The Japanese fired few artillery or mortar barrages, just a few rounds at a time when ensured of inflicting maximum casualties. That they usually did, and they then secured the guns to escape detection. Sometimes there was an eerie quiet. We knew they were everywhere, in the caves and pillboxes. But there was no firing in our area, only the sound of firing elsewhere. The silence added an element of unreality to the valleys. If we moved past a certain point, the Japanese opened up suddenly with rifle, machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire. It was like a sudden storm breaking. More often than not, we had to pull back, and not a man in the company had seen a live enemy anywhere. They couldn't hope to drive us off by then, or to be reinforced themselves. From that point onward, they killed solely for the sake of killing, without hope and without higher purpose. We are fighting in pellues, ridges, and valleys, in terrain the likes of which most Americans could not even visualize, against an enemy unlike anything most Americans would imagine. The sun bore down on us like a giant heat lamp. Once I saw a misplaced phosphorus grenade explode on the coral from the sun's intense heat. We always shaded our stacked mortar shells with a piece of ammo box to prevent this. Occasional rains that fell on the hot corral merely evaporated like steam off hot pavement. The air hung heavy and muggy. Everywhere we went on the ridges, the hot, humid air reeked with the stench of death. A strong wind was no relief. It simply brought the horrid odor from an adjacent area. Japanese corpses lay where they fell among the rocks and on the slopes. It was impossible to cover them. Usually there was no soil that could be spaded over them, just the hard, jagged coral. The enemy dead simply rotted where they had fallen. They lay all over the place in grotesque positions with puffy faces and grinning, bucktooth expressions. It is difficult to convey to anyone who has not experienced it with ghastly horror of having your sense of smell saturated constantly with the putrid odour of rotting human flesh day after day, night after night. This was something the men of the infantry battalion got a horrifying dose of during a long, protracted battle such as Pellew. In the tropics, the dead become bloated and gave off a terrific stench within a few hours after death. Whenever possible, we removed marine dead to the rear of the company's position. There they were usually laid on stretchers and covered with ponchos, which stretched over the head of the corpse down to the ankles. I rarely saw a dead marine left uncovered with his face exposed to sun, rain, and flies. Somehow it seemed indecent not to cover our dead. Often, though, the dead might lie on the stretchers for some time and decompose badly before the busy graves registration crews could take them for burial in the division cemetery near the airfield. During the fighting around the Umbrogle pocket, there was a constant movement of one weary, depleted marine company being relieved by another, slightly less weary, depleted company. We seemed to rotate from one particularly dangerous part of the line to one slightly less so, and back again continuously. There were certain areas we moved into and out of several times as the campaign dragged along its weary, bloody course. In many such areas, I became quite familiar with the sight of some particular enemy corpse, as if it were a landmark. It was gruesome to see the stages of decay proceed from just killed to bloated to maggot-infested rotting to partially exposed bones, like some biological clock marking the inexorable passage of time. On each occasion my company passed such a landmark, we were fewer in number. Each time we moved into a different position, I could determine the areas occupied by each rifle company as we went into the sector of the line. Behind each company position lay a pile of ammo and supplies, and the inevitable rows of dead under their ponchos. We could determine how bad that sector of the line was by the number of dead. To see them so always filled me with anger at the war and the realization of the senseless waste. It depressed me far more than my own fear. Added to that awful stench of the dead of both sides was the repulsive odor of human excrement everywhere. It was all but impossible to practice simple element field sanitation in most areas of Pellew because of the rocky surface. Field sanitation during maneuvers and combat was the responsibility of each man. In short, under normal conditions, he covered his own waste with a scoop of soil. At night, when he didn't dare venture out of his foxhole, he simply used an empty grenade canister or ration can, threw it out of his hole, and scooped dirt over it next day if he wasn't under heavy enemy fire. But on Pellew, except along the beach areas in the swamps, digging into the coral rock was nearly impossible. Consequently, thousands of men, most of them around the Umbrogo pocket in the ridges, many suffering with severe diarrhea, fighting for weeks on island 2 miles by 6 miles, couldn't practice basic field sanitation. This fundamental neglect caused an already putrid tropical atmosphere to become inconceivably vile. With the Old Breed by E.B.Sledge. Downstream, e.g., massive storm in the channel happens 9 to 5th June, instead of couple of weeks later, versus if Rommel had had his way with armoured reserves forward. Bud Guy 8829. From what I can see, the IJN had one plan, the IJA another. Neither was practical, as the IJN thought only a tiny force of soldiers would be needed, but the IJA thought it would need a lot, and that would mean stripping the focus on China. More than likely. Jack Hunter, I know they're not included on your list, but do you have any opinion on Mark Zill's works on the Canadian Army during World War II, especially those books focusing on their actions post-Overlord? I haven't read them yet. They're in... I have a box around here of books to read. That one. They're in that box. Well, there's one of them in there. Not yet read. Only a box. I started this, the whole thing with 3 boxes to read boxes of books to read beyond belief, and now I'm down to 1. So that shows you how much sleep I've been getting. Rapid Raceback. Did RAF Mosquitoes do any missions in conjunction with the Fleet Air Arm? Yes. They did lots. They did a bit of stuff in Italy, and they did a bit of stuff in Norway. All right, then. Next book. So, this book, slightly different. Flags of Our Fathers by James Bradley. It's all about Iwo Jima and the story of the flags being raised and the story of the men involved. It's an international bestseller. It's an interesting and well-written book in some respects. It's gets into the full joys of Iwo Jima and why it mattered, why you needed the airfields. I'm not quite sure why the Americans have so many E companies always referred to as Easy Company, because that just seems to me an anachronism. Why would you call E Company Easy Company? Because it's never going to be... There's no such thing as an easy company to be in. You know, Dog Company, I can understand. But if you're going to come with E, using the phrase... I suppose it's ironic, but it still doesn't seem right to me call any company Easy Company. I wonder if Jack and Jamie have literary aspirations. Well, we have two more. Well, to answer that one question, Jamie is a very well-published journalist in Australia. And Drac, I keep trying to persuade to write some books. So, well, and I'm working on Jamie as well. The Battle for Iwo Jima in 1945 and Ludovic Kennedy's Sinking of Bismarck to go. So we have two books and we have most of a glass of Iron Brew. So hopefully we'll get through them, and that's about one finished. So probably about 9:30 at this rate. By February 11th, the 5th Division Armada had rendezvoused with the 3rd and the 4th Divisions at Saipan. Filling the horizon was over 800 ships. Pausing one night's time before sailing the final 700 miles to Iwo Jima, there were more Marines massed here than there would be in uniform for the rest of the century. Just 8 months before, the 4th Division had wrested Saipan away from the Japanese. Now long gleaming white airstrips had replaced the rotting corpses amongst the cane fields. The boys of Easy Company watched the gigantic American B-29 Super Fortress bombers lumber down the 3-mile-long airstrips and lift slowly into the air on their way to bomb the Japanese mainland. They didn't know it, but some of those planes would not return because of a certain sulfur island, and it was for this reason that the Battle of Iwo Jima had been ordered. In the fall of 1944, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had rejected General MacArthur's plan to attack Japan via Taiwan and China. Instead, they endorsed Admiral Nip's plan of a frontal attack against the Japanese mainland. Preliminary saturation bombing of Japanese military plants and cities was part of the plan. The biggest obstacle an B-29 pilot faced in his bombing run from Tinian to Saipan to Japan was the lethal triple whammy of danger presented by Iwo Jima. Athwart the direct path to Japan, the island was almost exactly halfway between Marinas and Japan and boasted 2 airstrips and a radar station. As the superforts approached Iowa on their way to Japan, the radar station would give mainland defenders a 2-hour early warning. The gigantic B-29s, lumbering north on their 2,500-mile round-trip flight to attack Japan, made easy targets of small, quick fighter planes based on Iowa. And lastly, after enduring more anti-aircraft fire and dogfights over Japan, the B-29s, often damaged, would again be forced to face the IO-based fighters on their return trips. So many pilots and crews were being lost to watery graves. General Curtis LeMay, commander of the 25th Air Force, once warned that his pilots cannot sustain these losses much longer. And it was not only the bombers in the air that were vulnerable. The Army Air Force concluded that after the war, that Iwo Jima-based planes destroyed more B-29s on the ground in raids on Tiananmen and Saipan than were lost on all the bombing runs over Tokyo. But the conquest of Iwo Jima was not merely about cutting losses. In Allied hands, the island would take an offensive value. The B-29s could themselves land there to change crews, discharge wounded, or take on fuel, and they would be escorted to their targets by squadrons of Army Air Corps B-51 long-range fighters. Given these powerful incentives, the island had to be taken at almost any cost. The Army Air Force was doing its part to soften up Iwo Jima for the Marines. Beginning December the 8th, B-29 Superforts and B-24 Liberators had been pummeling the island mercilessly. Iwo Jima would be bombed for 72 consecutive days, setting the record as the most heavily bombed target and longest sustained bombardment in the Pacific War. One flyby on Saipan confidently told Easy Company's Chuck Lindbergh, "All you guys will have to do is clean up. No one can survive what we've been dropping." Some optimistically hoped the unprecedented bombing of the tiny island would make the conquest of Iwo Jima a 2 to 3 day job. But on the command ship USS El Dorado, Howlin' Mad shared none of this optimism. The general was studying reconnaissance photographs that showed that every square inch island had been bombed. The 7th Air Force dropped 5,800 tons in 2,700 sorties. In 1 square mile of Iwo Jima, a photograph showed 5,000 bomb craters. Ammonitz thought it was dropping bombs sufficient to pulverize everything on the island. But incredibly, the enemy defenses were growing. There were 450 major defensive installations when the bombing began. Now there are over 750. Howling Mad observed, "We thought it would blast any island off the military map, level every defense, no matter how strong, and wipe out the garrison. But nothing of the kind happened. Like the worm, which becomes stronger the more you cut it up, Iwo Jima thrived on a bombardment." The photographs shocked Smith's chief of staff. He would later write, "The prolonged aerial bombardment of Iwo Jima, which was a daily occurrence for over 70 days, had no appreciable effect in the reduction of the enemy's well-prepared and heavily fortified defensive installations. The air raids were called softening up activities, but in fact, Iwo Jima was becoming harder." It's a cool book. Let's see. Did it? A Buddy Guy 8829. How much of the impact if the US had started the war with the Mustang and the Hellcat, and what if the US used them M14 instead of the M1 or had gone with the box magazine version, the M1 Grand? In terms of the rifles, probably not much different. Honestly, it's not gonna change the battles too much. It's gonna make life more interesting for the infantrymen, but it's life. As for the Mustang and Hellcat, well, they pretty much did start World War II with them, in that by 1942 they were in service when the Americans really started fighting more. I know technically it starts in 1941, but really 1941-42, by the time they're getting involved in the war, they're there. And I know it's the old military phonetic alphabet, but it still seems rather cruel to me that Easy was there. Confidential 1207. Hello, I don't think I've seen you before. Why not use Eagle for E? I have no idea. It was their phonetic alphabet at the time. I remember at one time they were considering Edgar for the English phonetic, for the British phonetic alphabet. Bud Guy 8829. Would have been better if Nimitz had his way by invading. Possibly, but Nimitz was also the one who tends to win the battles and politics with MacArthur, because MacArthur is good at the showmanship politics in the press stage. Nimitz is good at the service politics of actually presenting a decent logical case. Paul from Chicago. Hello. How are you doing? Right then. Next book. Oh, good lord. Well, that's actually quite quick. 03, 06. Right, let's see what this one is. This one's a pretty cool one as well. Seriously, new IKB force them. Did the bombing of Jima just tell the Japanese that the Americans wanted the island really bad, so it must be worth defending it? Pretty much. Congratulations and good luck to Mrs. Chicago, Paul. Been foolishly busy helping Mrs. Chicago edit a journal article plus other life. Congratulations to that one. Journal articles are critical, and good luck. Yeah, if Jima, if you'd used an A-bomb, depending on where you'd have hit it, basically you'd have hit the target, wait a couple of weeks, turn up, and hopefully the radiation dissipated, but most of the garrison would have been dead. Wouldn't have been a particularly nice thing to do. War's not nice, but could have been theoretically more justifiable than Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but Hiroshima and Nagasaki were done theoretically to try and make things work for the so that you didn't have to invade Japan. Jima was done as preparation for an invasion of Japan. That might explain the difference in calculations. So, Lieutenant Keith Wells of 3rd Platoon Easy Company viewed the menacing slopes of Surabaki with more than a little trepidation. It looked hopeless. We had little or no protection from the enemy. I have a 5-gallon water can in front of me and a white wool blanket wrapped around me. I wondered what in the hell we were going to do and how the hell we were going to do it. My weapons were already clean, but while I was thinking, I cleaned them again. The artillery and naval gunfire denuded the ground before them, and huge blackened patches marked the impact of napalm canisters. Standing starkly to their front, a chain of blockhouses and connecting trenches loomed in the morning light. Wells decided that a brief reconnoitre of the enemy lines was called for. Leaving his weapons behind, he crawled forward to higher ground and studied the Japanese lines. Not more than 60 yards to his front, the Japanese officer returned the stare. Wells shouted his men, "Get that son of a bitch!" But before anyone could act, the officer stood up, gave a broad grin, and disappeared behind a damaged bunker. Crawling back to his lines, Wells phoned Company HQ and asked what assistance he was likely to get as they moved forward. The reply was that the tanks were still refueling and topping up on ammunition, and that the only marine artillery pieces in the area were facing the opposite way. The mortars were out of ammunition. They were not much use anyway, as most of the enemy were underground, and the heavy Navy ships had not yet returned from their nighttime stations many miles offshore. Less than reassured, he was told an airstrike could be arranged. The carrier planes duly arrived and swarmed over the slopes of the volcano, but in their concern not to hit the Marines, who were all in exposed positions, they attacked too far forward and hardly touched the Japanese lines. To compound their problem, the Marines now faced rows of barbed wire, which they had themselves placed in front of their lines the previous night to prevent Japanese infiltration. It had been assumed that the morning advance would have been spearheaded by Shermans, which would have flattened the wire before them. An order to attack came through from HQ, and the Marines moved out. We had nothing to attack with but our hand weapons, and nothing to protect us but the clothes on our back. Our situation looked so hopeless that I could not order the platoon to follow me. I stood up, pointed my Tommy gun towards the enemy, and took off running straight towards the grinning officer's bunker. I could think of nothing else to do. Never did I feel so alone in my life. The attack was unreal, like something out of a movie. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sergeant Thomas pulling rolls of wire out of the way. Then I saw Hanson and our platoon runner trotting close behind me. The others were coming. I just knew it. The platoon, from some inexplicable reason, did not come under fire and reach the Japanese front line. Rural, Hanson, Thomas, and I were leading this wild attack. Immediately behind us there was a sprinkling of 4 squads, including a young machine gunner and his helper from I Company. We continued to run straight at the enemy. I could not believe that they were not shooting at us. I stopped at the far edge of the bomb crater and quickly looked back across the open ground. I Company was still in their defensive position. The 3rd Platoon's right flank remained exposed. Shells were landing among the last to leave the defensive position. But when the dust cleared, I could see men standing up and continuing running towards us and the enemy. Rural Hanson charged on ahead to the trench, joining 2 concrete blockhouses. I turned around from watching our struggling platoon behind us just in time to see Rural Hanson drop to their hands and knees and look over the trench at the edge of the trench. They must have almost bumped heads with the Japanese because they jerked back fast. Rural Hanson had kneeled down side by side. Now they lay that way. Immediately over the side came an object much larger than the enemy's hand grenade. The large explosion charge landed between the 2 men. Rural yelled at Hanson, "Look out, Hank." Then he flopped down on the object. We heard muffled explosion. From the parachute, I saw Rule's body rise in the air and flop back. Hanson grabbed Rule by the pants leg and began dragging him back towards him, but I yelled and waved him to quit. One of Rule's shoulders fell back. It looked disconnected from his body, and I could see a great cavity that was once his chest. There soon followed a fierce battle between the platoon and the chain Japanese in the trench. With rifle fire and grenades, the Marines held the line until I Company machine gunner set up his weapon and cleared that section. However, the Japanese on the right flank launched an attack, and the machine gunner and his ammunition bearer were both killed. Wells and his men now turned their attention to a concrete bunker on their right, from which the enemy were showering them with hand grenades. Desperately needing supplies of fresh ammunition and charges were on the way in a supply tank. But a direct hit sent the tank and its crew skyward in a ball of fire. As he climbed out of its crater, a Japanese mortar shell exploded at Lieutenant Wells' feet. The shock and blast sound numbed my senses. It took me a few seconds to clear my mind. There was a sharp burning sensation in my neck and no feeling from the waist down. With my hands, I felt behind me to see if I still had my legs. My hand came back wet with blood and water. A large piece of metal had hit my canteen as it exploded. Another piece hit the stainless steel spoon in my hind pocket, returning the spoon inside out. Many small pieces of shrapnel buried themselves in my right cheek. A large piece of flesh was blown from my left leg just above the knee. Worst of all, a large piece of metal entered my left leg about a foot above my left knee. I found out later that a piece lodged in my neck. My clothes below to my waist were almost gone. I lay on my stomach, and they say that saved my front. Jima by Derrick Wright. It's a very, very good book. Mm-hmm. Take care, Night Hound Productions. Bug Guy 8829. Were there any plans on using the B-29 in Europe? Was it strictly planned on using it in the Pacific only? Also, how much do we know about the radiation before the bombing of Japan? A little bit about the radiation before the bombing of Japan, and honestly, if the war had gone on, the B-29 would have probably made it to Europe, but it was more useful in Japan, in the Pacific theater, because they needed the range there. And the B-17 Lancaster and B-24s were perfectly adequate for Europe. Skippy Afghanis, hello. Sorry I'm late to the chat. Has HMS Ulysses been discussed? It's one of my favourites in the Belford incident. Not yet, no. I don't think it's going to be. Gordon Collins, the aircraft they had in Europe were doing their job fine, but for the Pacific they needed the long range to bomb Japan. That's what I just said. Raparazo, I'm back. Any good ship histories for ships that served the whole war? Doesn't matter what country. Ian Ballantyne does some good stuff. His book on Rodney's worth a read. Calvin Gasper, Buddy Guy 88, radiation therapy was used back to 1908, so was known pretty much. Right then. Rapid Raceback. Were Lancasters used in Pacific? Actually, Lancasters were planned to, if the nuclear bombs were one of the options looked at for dropping the nuclear bombs. I think there was a specialist unit set up. So if it was being looked at. Right then. And on to the last book of tonight of Bru Ships. Ludovic Kennedy, The Pursuit, Sinking under Bismarck. It's a good book. It is a very, very cool book. And of course, Ludovic was, as I've told you before, aboard HMS Tartar during this. So he has a first-hand account, but he also has the history. He's done the research. Bad Guy 8829. Could the B-17s carry the A-bombs if range wasn't an issue? If you adapt to their insides, possibly, but it could be an issue. Calvin Gasford, B-29 range, but then one can pretty much exchange range for bomb load, and the B-29 was rather protected, even more than B-17 or B-24. Jack Hunter, right, Doctor. I'm off to Kip. Have a nice evening. Take care. Take care, Jack. Grace Elsie, if the modifications needed for B-29s carried the Bay bombs hadn't worked, the Lancasters were back up. Yep. Richard Hughes, Dr. Clark, what is your favourite period of history? Probably 1930s and 40s. 1920s, 30s, and 40s, that sort of period. I like stuff post-World War I, but pre the 1950s is my favourite. But I don't really mind. I like all history. I tend to be interested in all of it. Rapid Razorback, how could you use travel destroyers in the Philippines or Solomons? Ask the Australians. They were using them there. Rand tribal class destroyers were getting involved in quite a lot of fights in the Pacific in World War II, and they were doing credit to themselves quite well. New IKB 4472, given how bad all these descriptions of the fighting on Jima, am I surprised that no one suggested building a CV big enough for B-29s to fly from? I think they did actually suggest it, but I don't think they actually made it. Danny Freeman, re-radiation. I think it's a question of whether it was realized that the radiation effects from a nuclear fission explosion would be the physics or what was quite complex and hard to predict. To an extent. Skippy Africanus, what would have been the results if Texas was torpedoed by U-203 in June 1941? Not good. Would have probably caused quite a major rethink about some of the torpedo biologies on the Iwo Jimas. Oh, no, not the Iwo Jimas, on the Hours, sorry. Gordon Collins, B-17 had a divided bomb bay. The A-bomb wouldn't fit without significant modification. That's the thing. It would have required modification. Greg Selsey, B-17 max load was 3.5 tons. A-bomb was about 4.5. Also, the bomb bay was too small. Yeah. To be honest, the Lancs could carry it, but that also with some modification. So, you know. Probably the US would have joined the war a bit earlier. If the Germans do sink Texas in 1941, that's in June 1941, that's definitely that solves the problem for Roosevelt. Rather like Hitler's declaration of war in 1941 solved the problem for Roosevelt anyway. Maps, always a good thing. Rodney's captain was Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton, a big, tall Scot, owner of property in Wigtownshire. When he first heard Bismarck was out, he formed a small operations committee. The commander and navigator, a Captain Cobbinger, who was taking passage to America, an American lieutenant commander called Wellings, returning home after a spell as assistant naval attaché in London, himself in the chair. They met in the chart house 2 or 3 times a day, discussed the latest moves and signals, advised what actions Rodney should take. After Bismarck was lost, they agreed that if she was bound for France, they would be excellently placed to intercept her. Had best stay put and wait events. One other thing Dalrymple Hamilton needed to do, inform Tovey and Ambrose where he was. He was loath to make a radio signal that might be picked up by German DS stations and pass to Bismarck, but it was essential. Early the day before, a messenger from the Admiralty had told him to steer a course to close the enemy, which he ignored as it was wildly wrong. As a result, the Admiralty's latest broadcast situation report had placed Rodney some 200 miles from where she actually was. So the first and only time in the entire operation, Rodney signalled briefly her position, ships in company, and intentions. Of the 7 swordfish which Captain Bowen had flown off at 7:30 that morning to search for the north and west, 6 returned victorious 4 hours later. But of 5H, piloted by Sub-Lieutenant Jackson, observer Sub-Lieutenant Beryl, air gunner leading Airman Sparks, there was no sign. Victorious called for a long time. The lookout scanned the horizon. Nobody answered. Nothing came. Bovel felt the loss keenly, for 5H was manned by one of his best crews. Later he wrote of its observer to the Admiralty. Sub-Lieutenant David Beryl failed to return to Victorious only a few hours after he had taken part in the attack against Bismarck. A year ago, he took part as an observer in the bombing in the broad daylight at the enemy gun emplacements behind Dunkirk. Of the 10 aircraft sent on this operation, 5 were shot down, and those that returned were well battered. A month later, he was turned upside down in a Swordfish at night in a field while returning from a bombing raid. Some months afterwards, he went into the sea in the back of Swordfish over the side of HMS Furious, and again later on he went over again. I had never seen him dismayed under any circumstances. The events which Captain Darrell Hamilton and his committee had decided to wait for were not long in coming. They were not what they expected, and were to have equally unexpected results. In Bismarck that morning, Lutyens thought he was still being followed. 1 battleship and 2 heavy cruisers maintaining contact. He signalled Group West at 7 a.m., although the last British contact with him had been 4 hours earlier. Why Lutyens thought this, it is hard to say. It could be that the strength of the wireless signal made by Wake Walker at the time gave the impression of being nearer than they were, that the radar pulses from the British ships, though much too far to reach Bismarck and bounce back, were yet causing interference on her radar scan, assuming it was working again, or simply that Wake Walker's ships had been with him so long, had become so much part of his life and times, that he and his staff had become brainwashed, mesmerized into thinking that they must still be there. Whatever the reason, it was at this belief that at 6:54 p.m. and again at 7:48 a.m. he transmitted to Germany a long signal about the efficiency of British radar, the engagement with Hood, damage to the oil tanks, the unreliability of Bismarck's own radar, a thing he would not have dreamt of doing if he had thought he was alone, as only 2 days before, Group North had sent a signal warning of the efficiency of British radio direction finding. In the event, Bismarck's transmissions were picked up by various DF stations scattered around about Britain, and the bearings passed the operations staff of the Admiralty. They could hardly believe their luck. This was the sort of miracle they had been hoping for. The information that would give Bismarck's position showed what direction she was steering. In the Admiralty, Lieutenant Commander Peter Kemp plotted the bearings of it on a mnemonic chart, the kind suitable for radio waves, which followed the great circle of the Earth. They were a pretty woolly set, the approximate of the DF's proximity of the DF stations to each other and their great distance from Bismarck, resulting in almost parallel lines. No bearings from Gibraltar or Iceland to give a nice crosscut, but they showed Bismarck to the south and east of her last reported position. This is a very, very cool book. It's not in production. It's not, I think, still in print, but it's definitely worth a read. And it's very, very good. Right. So, Skippy Africanus, Daniel Prim, given that Reuben James was sunk, if the Texas was sunk, that might have been enough. Short of that, no. Yeah. Rapid Roseback, listening to bilge pumps and all the talk about Taiwan, what would it take to build sustaining base? A lot. A lot. Calvin Casper, a bomb and B-17. If pushed, one can strip the fortress of guns, gunners, and some armor and some fuel to squeeze in the bomb. Physical dimensions still a problem, though, as well as altitude. Then, I think there was a degree of failed understanding about some of the properties of reaching critical mass and things. It was still a beginning of nuclear science. Right. Jerison, don't get into swordfish with that guy. Just like me, never accept a lift from me. I agree. Freeman, I agree. However, she had found Bismarck while patrolling Denmark Straits. It would have been a quick death. How much of a fight could she have put up in minutes? Let's see. You never know. She might have got sunk, but if she, let's put it this way: if the Royal Navy had managed by some fluke to have USS Texas there alongside Hood and Prince of Wales in the Denmark Straits, then frankly that divides the Bismarck's far even more. If they're going slow enough that they're going to actually get involved in that fight, it would be an interesting fight to watch. I'm not sure how much damage Texas would do, but she would at least divide their fire. Okay. Bud Guy 8829, what would the US do if the Solomon campaign failed because the Japanese realized that Guadalcanal was their best chance of having a decisive battle using surface forces and sent their battleships? It would have been painful, but they'd probably come back again. Let's be honest, the US aren't going to stop. The US are, just because they lose one battle, are not going to stop. They're just going to build more and come back again and again and again. Rapid Razorback. Well, I know destroyers of Bismarck. The Narvik, pretty much. The Royal Navy had done fatal damage to the German destroyer forces in Norway in 1940, and the German destroyers never really recover. They might get back numbers, but they don't ever want to use them, and they do tend to worry about losing them. Plus, by then, she'd have been out with them anyway. Turning 3434. Dr. Clark, heads up. Simsec didn't add a podcast link to Bill Trump's 12s this week. Somebody posted a link in the reaction today, but I'll have a chat with Bill Trump over Simsec. There's lots of fun going on. We did quite well though in things, and we've got some stuff come up. As I said, episode 13, double feature for episode 14 with Commander Salamander, all coming up. I'm going to probably finish this in about 9:30 because my camera for my phone keeps going off, telling me there's weird stuff going on in the garden. So I'm going to go look at it, and I hear the girls running around as well. We have various cameras, and someone apparently tried to call me. Someone actually called me while I've been on this live. I do find my friend, some people fun. Right. It is 9:30. It's technically 9:28. There's a couple more minutes at least. Jerison, did the stalkers return? Do you still need a crossbow? They seem to be keeping away from the camera range, but they do seem to be heading up down our bottom of our garden. Seems to be something funny going on down there. And it's annoying me, and it's annoying my family. I'm not sure what they're doing. I'm like... seem to like shining torchlights at some of our windows for some reason. I have no idea why. Daniel Freeman, can track off a loan of a polearm or two? To be honest, for close quarter fighting, there are other systems I would prefer. Mount the maculations. Tempting. Tempting. Boarding pikes and muskets, especially tempting. Anyway, so, any questions before we finish up? Because we have managed to go through all the books. That's been rather cool. We've got through all 12 books. And as I said, you will soon have all sorts of things starting. I am putting in place various things and to make sure the channel keeps going, even when I go back to work, and even if I have to go back to work in normal and going and lecturing, there is going to be stuff coming up, and I'm going to still be able to do the lives and this sort of thing. I'm factoring it all because I don't want to let any of you down. You're all wonderful, but from the messages I'm getting, I don't expect to be going back into do lecturing on a regular basis for at least another year or so. So this could be carrying on with 2 lives a week, 2 lives and a Bru Ships a week, as long as for ages. I don't know. I would love to summon Shad. Because I'd love Shad actually to come on Bilge Pumps. I am very tempted to invite him to talk to Bilge Pumps and talk about things, because he does have an interesting, unique take on things. But I'm not sure if he'd want to talk about current affairs, and he is very interested in medieval. Bud Guy 8829. Did the US plan or have chance of replacing the battleships Arkansas and New York class with something more useful? They always had plans, but it's treaties and it's dealing with the reality of them. Dr. Clark, hope you have a pleasant evening, Doctor. Another good chat. Take care. Looking forward to the next Bilge Pumps and streams. Enjoy your road trip. That's later in September, hopefully. Let's give it a reference. Don't know if this is too far off topic. Just finished Age of Fear, offering an American identity during World War I. Germans were demonized America, racist. Was there a similar effort in the UK? Propaganda is very, very focused. Let's put it this way. Yickers, deploy the doggo. Have you met my fluffy research assistant? He's fluffy and friendly. He is good at barking. He's good at woofing. He's good at making noise. But let's be honest, if anyone's going down the bottom of the garden, it's probably me. I know. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Richard Hughes, Turning Free for Free, Daniel Freeman, Sean Mack, Joshua Peters, Rapid Razorback, Greg Stokowski, New IKB 4472, Dunkirk Ironhammer, thank you. Bud Guy 8829, thank you for all the very cool questions. Well, thank you for all the cool questions for everyone, but Bud Guy 8829 has been asking some particularly interesting ones this evening. Stafford Thompson, thank you. Skipper Africanus, thank you. Glad to see you again. Yickers, always good, pleasure. Calvin Gasberg, hello. Take care. And Albert Zaski, thank you. Martin Dock, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nick Waters, thank you. My pleasure. Jerison, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, as always, for making it a very fun evening for me, and I hope you enjoyed them. I hope you enjoyed the books. And I can show you a picture here because, as I said, I've been recording. Let's do that. Recording book programs all day, so that coming up, as I said, there will be a new series called 4 Random Books starting in September. There's already an example of them on Patreon, and it's going to start off with 1 week, which is the reading week I'm taking in September. There's going to be 3 coming out during that period, and then it's going to be a weekly thing. Every week there's going to be 4 random books, and currently I'm recording them at a rate about 4 or 5 a week. So yeah, there's going to be plenty into next year. Anyway, take care, everyone, and chat soon. Take care. Thank you. Oh. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Take care.